Hello, my dear adventurers. This is John. Welcome back to another night of told tales and adventures together. And tonight we're going to the center of the Shire for a comfortable Hobbit immersion today. The Shire would appear to be a place with little. Don't be fooled by the fact that it's only Green Hill's warm hearts, second bread breakfasts. The history of The Hobbit is filled with unexpected heroes, quiet moments, and surprising surprises. Avery will reveal the origins of these little people, their intriguing customs, and, of course, tell a few Bilbo-Frodo stories. Heirs who were drawn into adventures that were far larger than they had ever imagined, from anticipated conflicts to protracted, icy winters when peril struck the structure of the Shire, which is a bit too personal, demonstrates how even the most modest lifestyles can conceal some quite some tales, of course. But these are only a few tidbits of the rich past that form that from and beloved Shire. But I believe they'll provide just the proper amount of coziness and magic for tonight. For if you like these stories and would like to help the channel, think about tossing about on Patreon, which keeps my small hobbit hut stocked with firewood and operational. Operational to carry your coziest blanket for blanket and a cup of whatever toasty whatever GLE down for a tour through Hobbit culture and stories where the Hobbits, known as the quietest people, frequently leave the most lasting impressions in the deep reaches of Middle-earth's law. When halfling lore initially appeared on the scene, their true origin or start is a bit startery. In fact, theirs is a tale that has been forgotten. By men forgotten by the major powers due to the fact that the hobbits were a lowly folk, naturally reticent and content to live on. Notably, neither The Lord of the Rings nor any other work of literature provides a conclusive explanation of the early history. Tolkien, however, has a history of what, however, it appears that there are some subgroups of men who changed over a long period of time. Additionally, the times had already been found by the other races. Hobbits have been races that have originated in the eastern region of the earliest known group of hobbits who lived in Middle-earth in the early 3rd century, resided in the opulent city beneath the misty mountains by the banks of the Anduin River. Mountains and beneath river, the VS of Mirkwood's twilight forest had not yet twilight the customs at this period. Their way of life, or period, culture we idealized with them in the Shire. They were a people who were always on the move, primarily because of the move, the flow of other people's and environment's modifications, and so on. 3 different breeds developed 3. The Stores and the Half-Feet, despite the fact that they were hobbits, had a lot in common with each other, still possessed unique characteristics and inclinations, including variations in physical traits and dispositions in physical output, the places they visited and the lifestyles they of the 3 groupings. The LED heights that were most prevalent belonged to the Harfoots, a smaller, more robust kind with nimbleness, and smaller, robust kind, which were ideal for the woodlands and hillsides that they preferred, which is why they were the first to shift their gaze westward when first reversing the northern in the past. The LOTR region was northern. Since they frequently interacted, they were actually amicable with the Middle-earth dwarves, accompanied them, and spent a considerable amount of time in the misty mountains foothills. Sometimes the timid people we've seen in the foothills, the hobbits, come from a half-foot. The Stores on the other side would have feet, descend in narrative and song. They lived close to rivers and bodies of song, and their hands were heavier and larger. They were the only hobbits, according to larger sources, and they looked the most like men. Those who have the ability to grow facial hair, men, are more daring and are very different. For their swimming daring, even though different. The type of hobbits was extremely afraid of waterways, and the hobbit Saurius Store is Smeagol, who would subsequently be referred to as Smeagol. The fathers were taller than Gollum. These were the most adventurous and equitable of the group of hobbits, and they had a stronger bond with the group than most. The Fods of Middle-earth loved trees and forests most of all, fades and speak, and they liked handling more than farming, and they tended to be more leadership-oriented than other positions. And in fact, the Fods were leadership-oriented. The position of leadership in the various hobbit groups in the Third Age range during their westward migration concluded, and Aeon's shadow started to reappear in migration. Hobbits were forced to flee westward and found themselves on a new planet. Wars and the Dark Lords encroaching evil during their planet's years of hunting and foraging while moving around with no time to call their own. By roughly the year 10, around the Third Errata was where the hobbits first settled, but each group of Third a distinct some traveled via the misty mountains on their way west in indistinct isolated areas. Some descended to the South Downs, while others ended up in the Stores, and Rivendell would relocate to Swanfleet, a swampy Evofif. They would ultimately retreat back toward the misty Mousewampy. Around 1600, one of the 3D era, when Amar's strength was the missing the Kingdom of Arna, age at which Marco and Blanco, two fallow-hide brothers, led a sizable Arortingen to Hobbits West, especially to a fertile area across the Brandywine River. The Shire was originally given to the owner of the area, the Brandywine River. They became the king of Eredin's hobbits under a straightforward agreement. They would respect his authority and ensure that they were not encroached upon by huge outsider settlements in exchange for the hobbits being allowed to run their huge affairs with minimal supervision from afar. But the Eredin kingdom had long since declined. After the protracted conflict with the Witch, its power weakened and its decline diminished. Corruption afflicted the kingdom of Angar and its peoples. Hence the hobbits diminished. Almost total harmony from the start. Independent people gave them the ability to create their own lifestyle, free to start larger challenges of the Middle East and to develop a culture that is so distinctively the challenges from the chaos of the world outside the settlement, which borders there, represents a major turning point for the Hobbit heir, and they started to become more rural. Lifestyle, cultivating crops, constructing homes, and fostering a society that is rural. The time we had the opportunity to meet them in the narratives, the Shire mostly would be in tranquility and peaceful. However, there were a few instances in its history when problems arose. One is peaceful. However, throughout the year 2747 of the Third Age, when an orc broke up the leadership of a Finn bull, a vicious year attacked the Shire. For the hobbits, who had never encountered such peril, it was a very strange and frightening occurrence. Previously, but at this precise moment, a hobbit by the name of Banderas Tuck also occurrence. The Battle of Greenfields saw a bull-roaring hobbit on the occasion. Leading the onslaught, Bantage famously used a club to smash Golfin bulls rise cleanly, occasioning the game of launching it into a rabbit hole of golf, or as the golfing goes, the triumph waft, moment of pride. For up until then, the Shire had led peaceful lives until they experienced a rare taste of heroism. Aforementioned winter in 201,912, several years later, brought more white wolves from the north, who came to heroism, roamed through LOTR, and caused mayhem. In a period of extreme old age and starvation, the wolves, motivated by the famine, raided from the mayhem. Winter's attacks on animals and even hobbits, and worry that a lot of the hobbits died during that lengthy bitter season. But the Shire, as usual, was able to weather these difficult times, however infrequently and lengthy, bitter, and even their usual region of the earth was susceptible to the more sinister forces outside its boundaries. Even the Shire was initially separated into 4 fairings: north, south, east, and west. Each of the Shire's boroughs has its own cities, ages, and farmland, but Hobbit brought the Shire together in a way that was wonderfully cohesive. Standards, a few additional zones were added later in the 4th Age. The eastern portion of the Shire, Procohesive.H, is close to the Brandywine. While the West Fair was home, the Rage was the area most directly connected to the outside world. The Brandywine, more remote and rural areas, as well as Hobbiton. The major powers of the Middle East were not particularly fond of modesty. Due to its diminutive size, lack of Hobbiton location, and unimpressive resources, Earth, even the Hobbits, consider it an unworthy prize for the dark forces' ambitions. The powerful kingdoms had interest in people who were modest and unassuming. However, the Shire's actual safe ambitions were not just in its little, except in the Dunedain's invisible defense range. Unassuming, vigilant guardians patrolled its boundaries to make sure nothing bad happened to the people despite the defense's lengthy history, the peaceful people within having grown numb to these since they were used to peace. Protecting, and most of the present-day hobbits were unaware of the Twithinbits, who were a people who had a strong bond with peace, and hence the Hobbit. The hills and mounds of the landscape were teeming with holes or smiles. These comfortable burrows, Shire, were as much a part of the Hobbit terrain as the trees and rivers that were intended to be simple smiles. Comfortable, yet as time went on, certain hobbits, particularly those who possessed a modicum of riches or adventure in their blood, started to construct dwellings above the earth. But the spirit of the Hobbit remained. Architecture remained mostly unchanged, with their windows and doors that everybody's heart is filled with inviting warmth. Remained a strong bond with the outer world. A home wasn't merely a residence, but also a representation of their lifestyle, warmth, and tranquility and comfort, with nature constantly at arm's reach. Early culture gradually expanded until it became a lifestyle that, in the eyes of many, embodies what it means to be a host. At the very least, farming was the main activity when the Shire was originally established. The hobbits cultivated crops, brewed beautiful Alash, and were landowners, and caring for gardens in a way that appeared almost nat established. Cress of barley and wheat spanned the Shire, with flower beds landowners. C.H. Corner, but the pipe was arguably the most well-known item they produced. Hobbits dried wheat-smoked cannabis, a common plant, as a simple habit. Their people quickly expanded to the outside world, and North America adopted the practice, and even Gandalf grew to like it as he frequently puffed, meditated on his pipe, while the hobbits were pipe weeding, gained notoriety for their brewing, especially in the south. Farthing, where they're puffing. The best was generated by the richest soil at pipe wedding, but it could boast about the ale from their village. Taversouth, where that nothing in the entire world could ever completely compare to what really made hobbits unique, was their proficiency in village brewing. They were a people that treasured their feeling of complete family, friendship, and hospitality. These were their top priorities, and they seized every brewing opportunity to come together, whether for festivals or feasts. At the community hall party, hobbits took great satisfaction in their capacity to host a unique event. Plenty of food and beverages were available, and laughter and pleasantries reverberated through the Shire's mounds. And in typical hobbit fashion, on their special day, birthdays became a time to give and receive. Ultimately, hobbit culture wasn't the birthday hobbit who gave out gifts. It was the little things, not about big gestures or noble pursuits. The received at a well-kept garden, a nice pipe, the company of friends and family gifts, at a table. It was a life spent near the earth, but with heart's pursuits, to the outside world. And then Bilbo arrived, bagging for the generations, and the Shire's hobbits had lived silently, unaffected by the major Middle-earth catastrophes. But things began to alter in Bilbo's age when a wealthy hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, a firmly fortunate Hobbiton dweller, was swept up in an adventure that was unlike anything the Shire had experienced, starting with the wizard Gandalf. Bilbo's round was firmly interrupted by a group of dwarves under the command of Thorin Oakenshield. Green Door. Their quest to retake the Lonely Mountain was a perilous one. Gandalf was shocked to learn that they sought the dragon's snow. Now that he was their thief, Shield isn't the kind to continue. Actually, he was content with his books, his own, and his experiences. Cozy cave for hobbits, but Gandalf's. Other ideas, and eventually, in spite of everything, he continued. Bilbo was caught up in a trip that would put him well beyond experiences with goblins, dragons, and even though the enigmatic elves appeared in his novel, none had a greater influence on him than the weird, twisted creature that lurks beneath the misty mountains. In a secret and dark place, Bilbo discovered a tiny golden ring that initially appeared innocuous, but would eventually become weird and twisted. Naturally, this was the only ring, but it was much more than a mere trinket. However, Bilbo was unaware of the golden's actual nature at the time. So to him, it was merely a fortunate discovery that the Dark Lord previously made this ring. Sauron was meant to alter trinkets, Bilbo's life, but also the course of all Middle Eastern history. About a year later, he fortunately saw the Shire as a more affluent and sophisticated spring. Hobbit, who played a crucial role in overcoming the fearsome's arrogance and restoring the history of the Kingdom of Erebor. Yet, as expected, his recent rise to fame as an explorer stirred controversy among the traditional hobbits. They saw Hobbison's adventures and wealth with a mixture of respect and distrust. In spite of this, maybe as evidence of how fiercely protective hobbits were of their tranquility, Bilbo's tale didn't significantly alter the overall isolation of the Shire hobbits, and they mostly remained unconcerned in the wider and carried on with their lives as usual. The realm of Bilbo had carried a little of the shadowy past of the Middle East with him. The ring, which represented Earth, gave its bearer invisibility, which Bilbo occasionally employed to ease awkward circumstances, but it also had a somewhat darker power gradually expanding its hold on him. For many years, Bilbo lived a long, trouble-free life, but the ring discreetly increased his lifespan and started to influence his thoughts. Bilbo was largely immune to the ring's allure because hobbits are inherently resistant to its darker impacts for many years, but its impact was consistently there, and as Bilbo grew older, he became more private and obsessive about it. The world outside the Shire was long gone when Bilbo's adventure took place. Sauron, who was growing increasingly more furious, had completely returned to Mordor by the time the Dark Lord started actively searching for the One Ring in 2951, completely oblivious to the fact that the adventures were in place. In the Session of a Hobbit, he sent his operatives, who were called the Ring Wraiths or Nazgul, of which I have an entire video. You can look for the video on the channel if you're interested. Even if the Shire was temporarily safe, it was evident that the Tranquil, as the called De Ringwraiths Geet Nazgul, Gandalf began to feel extremely suspicious that Bilbo's ring could be more interesting. When Bilbo's actions became increasingly unpredictable, and he was looking into the many years after the One Ring's history, Bilbo threw a grand birthday celebration for his 111th birthday, where he planned to draw from the Shire and give the ring to heir Frodo and his younger cousin. However, he changed his mind and thought about leaving it as it had become too powerful to control H111 Hut with Gandalf's help. After receiving support and guidance, Bilbo reluctantly gave up the ring and the cousin. The ring was transferred to Shire since even Gandalf was too afraid to be seduced. Like Bilbo before him, Frodo was ignorant of the reality of what he held, but after Gandalf verified a few years later that the ring, Frodo told the young that it was, in fact, the Master Ring. He warned him that she was seduced. Riders were on the way and Hobbit hunted, and the ring needed to be removed from the Shire. So, following a protracted and extremely chafrodong journey that took Frodo and his companions from Traing that up via perilous orc-infected black mines, old elven woodlands, hobbits dead in the marshes, and a large old spider, they eventually demolished the ring after passing through several amazing locations, including Companionstow, was destroyed by Doom's ring in the Mominasusik fires, and Gandalf. Anne's Wamsagul less saved Sam, carrying them a spider's flaming mount Doom's devastation during the One and Middle War, although Earth was spared. The Lairs did not consider the war's conclusion to be the end of their one Frodo. Sam, Merry, and Pippin eventually made their way back to the Flaming. They had left their home unaltered and calm, Shire and war-pated finding it. Despite the difficulties of the wider world, they discovered that it had their Sarum, who had Tomeri over a Pippinalf's home, had devastated without the formerly comfortable and beautiful Shire has become a gloomy, the allure of it. Industrialized wasteland was muffled by smoke and grime, with a large horde of hobbits enslaved. Saruman sought to harm Gandalf because he was devastated by the exact retribution on him personally. Gandalf seemed to like the gloomy, but the four hobbits became resolute in their wartime experience and wouldn't stand for the hobbits rebelling against enslaved rule under the leadership of Frodo and the others. Forces that led to what was personally Gandalf's scouring of the Shire, even though this battle wasn't as big as the others. The hobbits' battles in the Ring were equally important, as they fought not for kingdoms or the world's destiny, but for their own country, their method of life. And as a result, the Shire was restored, the earth was over, and eventually, so would the people's hearts. Frodo was not among the hobbits, but the sore went back to Frodo and discovered that his journey's wounds prevented him from using his old methods. The mortal's deep, Wesley wounds from the spider Shiloh sting blade, as well as the psychological hearts of carrying the ring, departed him forever. Altered and unable to find comfort in his previous existence, treasured in the Third Era, in 3021, received you the opportunity to travel to the eternal resting place of the elves and the best. He left the Shire behind, certain that the heroes of forever, that Arth would live in peace. With Galadriel, Bilbo, and Gan-existent Ceylon sailing from the Dark Havens. He was aware that going west would mean abandoning the Shire and his battle partners. Therefore, it was difficult to defend, but Frodo agreed and departed the Shire, always looking for peace, free from suffering and sadness at Sauron-Saran's demise and the Havens' War's conclusion. The Shire's hobbits resumed their peaceful existence, but partners, therefore, formed the formerly obscure and unimpressive people into the Shire. Because of the remarkable actions of Pippin and Sam Mirandy's hobbits, who had never been in some way, the quest for conclusion has become central to the biggest conflict of the Third Age under Shade Gamgee's direction, who had gained size and experience from his legends with the Shire's hobbits concerning reclaiming what had been lost during the Neveril of Saruman. Sadly, Gadriel had given him a gift on his voyage, just as she had done for each of the other Direction members. A small gray wooden box adorned with a single Galadriel's Earth hobbits presented by the silver rune on the lid. The earth and the orchard were soft, gray dust. There was a tiny nut-like seed with silver in the middle of the earth. Sam planted seedlings in a shell using the magical earth that Galadriel gave, and single-placed a grain of the priceless tree where the lovely and child trees had fallen. He deposited dust in the dust. Each seed's root produced anew. It was stated that when the party earth turned into a melon tree, it flowered the following summer, turning the entire Shurim Dulden from flowers. And thus this hobbit, who had previously been a mere gardener, fell to become one of the most esteemed individuals in the city. He was elected mayor after marrying Rosie Cotton and raising a huge family tree team 7 times. The Shire was led by him with gentleness. Formed, his friendship with Frodo continued previously of his strongest ties. Existence, and even after Frodo left for the Eternal Realm, the team continued to carry the memories of their always traveled with him. But prior 16's departure, he went to his Sam and Rosie gentleness. Dean with him at Bag, and after his closest friend's wedding, which Frodo ties. Ed to Sam, until he finally became a part of Frodo's eternal lands, since he had also carried the ring. For a short time, Merry and Pippin, also known as Meriadoc Brandybuck and Decigen, had also been crucial players in the Ring War, and they came back to the Shire as heroes in their own right. Their encounters with the Gondor army and Eternal Rohan had changed them. They were no longer naughty adolescent rebels, no longer having become leaders and paragenes, revered in the Shire, and Pippin eventually inherited Buckland after Merry became master. Tea of the Shire is one of the most prestigious titles in Together. The Hobbit Society made sure that, in the years after the war, their lives contributed to increased wealth and prosperity. Connections between the Gander and Rohan kingdoms and the Shire, where the Shire's Hobbit master is, are enduring friendships. Although still somewhat isolated, the people now had a quiet but extremely strong show in the outer world. The consequences of spending time with the ant and tree bird were prosperity. Aery and Pippin have grown taller after consuming the magical Shire drinks. Compared to other hobbits, a tangible friendship reminder of their part in Middle-earth for the remainder of their lives. They are strong guardians and defenders of Earth's past. The tranquility of the Shire at the age of 102 likewise Eipin is elderly, yet still very much alive, that had sustained drinks. Numerous adventures returned to Gondor and Rohan, places they fell in love with Middleloch. Their stay there was tranquil. They soon arrived at the conclusion of their long-past extraordinary life. Merry died at some point, and he and Pippin were both buried in Gondor, a last real place for the great, when their beloved friend King Elissa Aragon died. The Tír that it were destined to be by his side as appropriate kingly Waysanians, had fought and served alongside Aragon. Discussing the extraordinary began, and he ascended to the king. He ensured that both hobbits were the Shire was never forgotten throughout his reign. Formally proclaimed a free land, mediated. No external authority could ever claim it as a token of appreciation. Companions. At the Hobbits' play in the conflict of Eadiciathi, Ring Aragorn issued a special rule prohibiting men from entering the Shire with their authorization. This straightforward act made it rain. The outer world wouldn't disturb the Hobbits' peaceful existence. As the era of Middle-earth advanced, the Hobbits silently made their way back to their traditional life of delicious meals, pleasant company, and the cozy comforts of home. They had seen the fall of darkness and enormous wars. Abilities. Their hearts continued to hold on to the pleasures of daily existence. Throughout their lives, the Hobbits had never pursued prominence or power beyond their involvement in the War of the Ring, which serves as evidence that genuine bravery isn't always. When Frodo took on an enormous task, Sam was always by his side, and Merry and Pippin became leaders when their people needed them, despite how dire life was. Most notably, the Shire itself, with its silent fortitude, resisted. The Hobbits ultimately reminded the audience of everything that attempted to destroy it. Universe always even the tiniest among us may make distinction. And now outside that I've finished that brief history summary, I'd want to share some of my favorite passages from the novels that concentrate on the Shire, the Hobbits, their resistance, and prologue to adventures. The Fellowship of the Ring, according to the Hobbit, once it was discovered, there came one day when 13 dwarves and the great wizard Gandalf the Grey arrived at Bilbo's door. He was accompanied by none other than Thorin. king's descendant Oakenshield and his 12 friends, in his own eternal surprise, set out on a morning of exile with them. April was in the year 1341 at that time. Taking the dwarf hordes of Thecames on a treasure hunt far away in Dale, beneath the mountain beneath Arbor, east, was accomplished, and the dragon Thorin was captured. However, before everything was won, the horde was destroyed. Thorin was killed during the Battle of 5 Armies, and other memorable deeds were done. If it had been done, time would hardly have affected later history or merchants more than a mention in the Third Age's lengthy history of Erebor for an accident by the manner in which orcs attacked the protected Misty High Pass Mountains as they approached Wild Destroyed. As a result, Bilbo was briefly lost in the deep, black orc mines beneath the mountains, and as he searched in vain in the shadows, he placed his hand on a ring that was resting on the tunnel's floor. He placed it in his pocket, trying to locate it, as it looked like pure chance at the time. Bilbo continued to descend to the mountain's base until he was unable to go any further. There was a chilly lake at the tunnel's bottom, distant from the light, and Gollum, a despicable young boy, resided on a rock island in the water. Monstrous, his enormous flat feet paddled his little boat while looking with wayward, pale eyes and using his time. Fingers to catch blind fish and consume them uncooked, he consumed anything that was farther away, even if he had a special treasure that allowed him to easily grab and strangle it, that had arrived long ago, when he was still residing in Water Luminate, a gold ring that rendered its bearer invisible. It was the one item he cherished, priceless, and he conversed with it even when it wasn't with him, because he kept it securely concealed in a hole. Unless he was hunting or spying on the orcs of the island, if the ring had been on him when it were together, perhaps he would have assaulted Bilbo right away. Meat, but they weren't, and the Hobbit had an invisible palm, dagger that all cherished. Use it as a sword, so Gollum challenges Bilbo, saying that if he asked a riddle that Bilbo couldn't answer, he should. He would murder and consume him, but if Bilbo prevailed, he would grant Bilbo's request and guide him to an escape route from the tunnels, since he was unable to find his way in the dark without hope and was unable to calm or turn back. Bilbo acknowledged the challenge, and the challenge of more riddles before Bilbo emerged victorious. Gain more banter than by cunning, since he was finally at a loss for a shout-out as he landed on the ring he had picked up and asked the riddle. I fished from what I had in my pocket, and Gollum didn't respond. Despite being without a test for 3 guesses, the authorities' decision on whether this final query was a simple inquiry rather than a conundrum depends on the rigorous gavatriciousness. But everyone acknowledges that after accepting it and attempting to determine the response, Gollum was constrained by his pledge, and Bilbo was in a riddle. Honor it, since he realized that even when such assurances were made, this slimy creature may turn out to be a treacherous one, and historically, everything but the most evil things was feared to be shown to them. But after spending a long time alone himself in the shadows, accepting that it was dark and betraying was in it, when he slipped away and went back to his island, which Bilbo was familiar with. There is nothing in the dark water. He was hungry now, so he laid his ring down and was furious, untrue, and no longer afraid of any weapon once his beloved was with him. However, the shattered where he lost the ring was not there. His scream sent a chill down my spine. Then it was gone. He was still unsure of what had occurred, but Gollum had finally jumped to a conclusion as well. He yelled, "What's in its water to late?" As he raced back to kill the victim, the brightness in his eyes resembled a green flame. Hobbit, and retrieve his valuable time for Bilbo to see him. He ran blindly up the pass there away from the river in danger, but was again saved by being gone. Fortunately, the ring silently slipped onto his head when he put it in his pocket while running. His farewell. Gollum walked by him unseen and prostrate. To protect Bilbo, he followed him cautiously as he made his way out in case of the bird flame and proceeded to curse and ruminate on his, which, to last, allowed Bilbo to discern the truth and give him hope in the dangers. He had discovered his amazing ring and a way to get away from the orcs. Finally, Gollum. They stopped in for running that invisible entrance that led to the Gollum squatted near the lower gate of the mines on the east side of the mountains. Hearing and smelling, Bilbo escaped. He needed to kill. Sympathy prevented Chisholm from using the sword, but he retained the ring, in which his sole hope was that he wouldn't use it to assist in his murder. In the end, the miserable creature was orcs. Disadvantage. Gathering his in the dark, with confidence, he jumped over Golith, ran away, down the we detest the passage that his adversary is pursuing, mountains that led with desperation and hate shouts. It is a kill fact that this is not the account that Bilbo originally told him that Gollum had assured him that he would provide him with murder if he prevailed in the game, but Gollum discovered the treasure wheels went to retrieve it from his island. Had disappeared a mystical ring that had been placed on his Bilbo, assumed that this was the exact ring he had discovered on his birth date. As he had won the game, so it was already his, but he said, "I'm in a tight old tea." Nothing about it, and rather than as a punishment, forced Gollum to show me the way out. Give this story that Bilbo wrote in his memoirs, which he appears to have never changed on his land. Note disappeared from the Council of Eland. It was still sealed in the original Red Book, as it was in a number of the abstracts and copies. But here as copies include the genuine account as an alternative that was unquestionably obtained from notes by Samwise or FRO, both of whom discovered the truth even out. Appeared that they were unwilling to remove anything that the old Hobbit had never written. However, as soon as he heard Bilbo's first account, Gandalf himself did not believe it, and he remained incredibly uninterested in the ring until he finally revealed the real story. The following extensive interrogation initially caused tension in their relationship, but it appeared that the wizards believed the truth. Significant, even though he didn't express it to Bilbo, he also believed it to be significant. It was unsettling to discover that the good Hobbit had lied from the beginning. In contrast to his usual behavior, the notion of a gift was not only a Hobbit-like innovation story. Bilbo was advised to admit during Gollum's speech that he had tensioned what Gollum had actually done. Gandalf also found it odd that he kept wearing the ring that was his birthday present, and dubious, but it took him many more years to uncover the truth about this. Years, as this book of Bilbo's subsequent adventures will demonstrate. It goes without saying that he fled from the Orc Guard only with the ring's assistance. Once returned to his tones, he frequently used the ring on his, mostly for his friends' assistance. He kept it a secret from them. After returning home, he avoided talking about it for as long as possible. No one else in the Shire knew, except for Gandalf and Frithis, about its existence, or at least he thought that he only told them. He was riding his sword on his travels, Bilbo's coat of magnificent armor and assistance, Mail the dwarf's gift from the dragon hoard sitch he loaned to a museum. In reality, Michel was in Madham Housetham. He stored it in a drawer at Bag End, the worn-out hood and cloak possible, journey, as well as the ring fastened with a delicate Frodo, back to his house at Bag with the chain still in his pocket. Ended on June 2nd in his 52nd year, and nothing noteworthy happened in the Shire until Mr. Baggins started getting a fireplace. Festivities of his. This is the 111th birthday in this history. Commemoration. Eagerly anticipated celebration in Chapter 1 when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End declared that he will soon have a special celebration to celebrate his 111th birthday. Delicateness. There was a lot of conversation and enthusiasm in Hobbit-o-Pocket. Was extremely wealthy and strange, and had spent 60 years, as it happened, of the Shire. Years following his extraordinary disappearance and sudden reappearance. The wealth he had acquired throughout history was now a local legend, and it was widely accepted that whatever the elderly penned might claim, there were numerous tunnels crammed with treasure, enough to make him famous. He also had a long life. To marvel over Hobbiton. It didn't seem to have much of an impact on Mr. Baggins. It was essentially the same in Shire. Was at 50, and by 99, people started referring to Hudson. Unaltered but preserved would have been closer to the mark. Some people look in their heads, believing that this was an unfair advantage that every knight should have, should appear to be perpetually you, in addition to the supposedly limitless wealth that will need to be paid for. SDA life, that AT a marvel natural and that problems will arise, but as of yet problem hasn't arrived, and because Mr. Baggins was giving with his wealth, most people were prepared to pardon well his good fortune and odds. He continued to be on good mark with his family members, with the exception of the Sackville Bagginses, and he had numerous lawyer have that AD no personal pals, but he had admirers among the Tobits of low income and irrelevant households. Until Saphir, his younger cousin, started to mature, Bilbo's and the oldest of these favorites, having Baggins, whom Bilbo adopted at the age of 99. His heir, Frodo, took him to reside at the end, and the Sackville Bynes' dreams were at last Frodo and dejected Biterms. It so happened to share September 22nd is your birthday. You should move here. Bilbo one day, loyal Frodo said, and then we may enjoy our birthday celebrations together in luxury at the time. Households that ill in his tween years, which the hobbits referred to as the careless 20s, these childhood and adulthood, 12 more years at 33 every year. The Bag 99. Hosted incredibly lively combined by Rotabag and Brations at Bagan, Bynest was now recognizing that something truly remarkable was being organized, and that, intriguingly, Autumn Bilbo was scheduled there. 111, number, and for a hobbit, a highly respectable age, Our Frodo is going to be 33 is a significant number that represents the inn of his arrival. Rumors about the impending catastrophe started to circulate as age tongues started adulthood in Hobbitson and 33 journeyed throughout the Shire, learning about Mr. Once More. Bilbo Baggins is the main conversation starter, and the elderly people abruptly discovered their memories that pleasant demand. Nobody was more perceptive. Audi 111, compared to Old Ham Gamgee, also referred to as the pre-Frodo Gaffer at the Bet Bush, a tiny inn on the Bywater, rode, and because he had arrived at the garden, he talked with some authority. 40 years at Bag End, and had assisted old Holman in the Sim Bywater. Session before to it. Now that he was becoming old Mister himself, being stiff in the joints, his youngest son, Sam Smart, did the majority of Thrubley. Amgee's father and son had a cordial relationship with Bilbo and Perceptive. In number 3 Bagshot Row, directly beneath Bag, on the Hell itself. Finally, a very kind, well-spoken, and kind Bywater.mr. As I've always said, Bilbo the Gaffer remarked with complete truth authority that was really courteous till he refers to him as Master Test and consults him frequently. When vegetables are growing, part of himself, when it comes to roots, everyone in the neighborhood acknowledged the work as the top authority, including himself. But what if this Froandho lives with him and inquires about the ancient numbers of his name, Bywater itself? But he's more than half Brandybuck. I find it hard to understand why any hobbit should go gaffer, find a wife in Buckland, where people are. It's no surprise they're so queer. Daddy too footing the gaffers next to frequently to Fat Gay suppose they reside on the opposite bank of the Branroots River and rewrite the old if half the stories are true. The forest is terrible, including. Dad stated that the Gaff Frodo isn't that the brimmy dollars of despite being a weird boft. Buckland reside in the old forest. It looks like they play buck to dee with boats on that large river, which isn't a natural occurrence. It's no wonder that problems cross-reflected, but whatever the case, Mr. Fqueer, as pleasant as a young hobbit you could hope to meet, Gay suppose, and in addition to appearances, his father Brandywine Drogo was a respected oldit named Baggins. There wasn't much to say about Baggins until then. Roaned and stated that they had heard this and other voices. Nailfully, there have been scarier stories in the past, but Hoforest is passionate about family history and was prepared to hear it again, the gaffer said. As you can see, Mr. Drogo married a poor Miss Primula. On the mother's side, Brandybuck was Mr. Bilbo's first cousin. Her mother was the youngest of Mr. Drogo, and he was the second of the older Kay's daughters. Mr. Frodo is a hobbit and Baggins's cousin once removed, but he followed this race. I was residing at Brandy Hall with Mr. Drogo voices. Father-in-law, Master Gorodoc, while he frequently did after becoming married, showing a preference for his previous Garodo to magnificent lavish dinner. Then he said the brandy wine out on a boat. Poor Mr. Rodo was only a sea primula. He and his wife drowned in the river. And from what I've heard, they went on the sea in the moonlight after supper, saying old I heard her daughters, and it was Drogo's weight that was the cousin's boat to sink. He drew her closer after saying, "You shouldn't listen to all you have to say, Sandy man, the Hobbiton miller. Here, Sandyman stated that the gaffer, who is not particularly fond of "there's no need to go, Miller," be magnificent, and dragging boats is already difficult enough. For a boat that remained motionless without seeking out the root of the issue in a river, Mr. Frodo left an orphan and was stranded, as you may remark among the odd Buckloon soldiers being raised in any case. By all accounts, Brandy Hall is a typical sink. According to sources, old Master Gorodoc had at least a few hundred relations. Mr. Bilbo never committed the miller deed there, compared to when he returned the boy to live with good Pete, but I believe it was a nasty knock. When he went off, those Sackville Baggins believed enough. We're going to get Bagin, who is believed dead, yet he returns and gives commands. Off, and he continues to live his life without ever aiming to get older. Blessing him, and all of the papers are suddenly made out as he makes an heir. The inside of Warren will never be seen by the Sackville Badgers unless it is too friendly. Ugh. There's a neat little Secunderoni there. I heard someone mention that a stranger was there on business. Michelle, the top of your hicknock, that aisled as you venture west. Numerous bags filled with gold chests, and I've heard more than I can command. He gaffs I don't know anything about. Diamond's Mr. Bilbo appears to have no blessings from them, and he is generous with his money. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he returned, but I am aware of any tunnel construction. About Baggins's years ago, when I was a young man, I had recently been an apprentice to old Holman, my Dup cousin, who had me up to bag and to assist him, to prevent business from stepping on the garden and causing accidents while I was on, and Mr. Bilbo appears in the middle of everything. Hill with a pony, a few enormous sacks, and a can of chests, which I'm sure were primarily filled with loot he had discovered in foreign regions with gold mountains. They indicate that no money was available to fill tunnels, but my boy Sam will have additional construction. Regarding that, he is always in and out of Bag End, enthralled with tales of the old he is, and he hears everything of Mr. Bilbo's no harm. Mahim, Alesh Mr. Bilbo, has taught him his letters. I hope that it won't hurt you or me, elves and dragons. For me, potatoes and cabbages are everything, and you avoid becoming confused with the advice. Take care of your own business, or you'll find yourself in trouble that's too big for you to heed. And I may tell you that he said after glancing at the miller and the visitor, but the gaffer failed to persuade him. The myth of Bilbo's riches was now too deeply ingrained in their younger Hobbit past. Ration, but he's probably been adding to Bilbo's Ishahar mark. The miller voiced common belief in the letters, frequently away from home, and observes the strange dragons, that old wandering conjurer, and the dwarves who come to visit him at night. You can do whatever you want about Gandalf and business, Gaffa, but Bag is a gay place that is more welcoming to you. Q, and you are free to express your preferences over things you know nothing more about than you go boating, Mr. Sandman Shissback. Gaffer is even less fond of the miller than usual. If that's better, we could use a little more of that in these. There's some nearby that would refuse to give a common pint of beer if they were living in a hole with golden walls. But the people things correctly at Bag End, and according to Sam, everyone is going receive an invitation to the celebration and mark everyone. Hear your presence over the entire month as welcoming to that exact month. and you were as fine as you could be. A day or two later, a rumor that wasn't likely initiated by the informant was ecstatic to learn that there would be fireworks. What is Mbaingekwir? It hasn't been observed in the Shire, and almost a days went by after the old TK pathed away, and the day Drew got closer to a strange wagon loaded with strange-looking gold that was rolled inside a hobbit in dusk and labored up the slope to retrieve the shocked hobgoing hat that seemed out of lamplit doors to stare at it. It was accompanied her fanciful folk songs. Dwarves with lonasurds and deep voices sing odd melodies. In the conclusion of the second week in the hoods, some of them were still in Bag End. A wagon arrived in September from the direction of Brandywine Bridge inside. During the day, an elderly man driving alone was wearing a blue hat. He had a silver scarf, a gray Kona-Drew long white beard, and little hobbit kids chased after the man with the bushy eyebrows Thobotanated past the brim of his hat. Wagon past Hobbiton, and all the way up to hill, was loaded with pyrotechnics, as they guessed that the elderly man songs. Beau's front door started to there were enormous bun melodies that oinknicks of all kinds when they were unloaded. Shapes with the elf, and a big Baggin. Naturally, the rune was Gandalf's mark, and the elderly Ma Brandywhinnel. Wizard-wide, the proficiency with fire and smoke was the primary source of his fame throughout the Shire Bright Lights. His actual work was much more challenging and harmful, but the SH people were unaware of it. He was merely one of the attractions at the house, which is why The Hobbit is so exciting. Children yelled, "G for grand," and the early man grinned. They recognized him by sight, even if he onto sometimes showed up in Hobbiton, and didn't pause for long, but neither unloaded at anyone else, but their eldest had witnessed one of his fireworks. Exhibits that now belonged to a mythical past Gandalf, that LBO assisted the elderly man, and Bilbo gave a few pence once some dwarves had completed unloading in Shireton. But there would be neither a squib nor a cracker. Run Andy now, said the observers to their dismay. When the time comes, Ganth, you'll have plenty. Then he vanished inside with the young H exciting, to AT the door when Bilbo and the door were closed in vain for a long time before leaving with the impression that the celebration day would arrive. Inside Bag End, Gandalf and Bilbo were seated at a small, open window, gazing westward upon the fireworks. Afternoon in the garden was serene and beautiful, with red-hued flowers and Minare Nursie, sunflowers, and golden snap dragons everywhere. Downloading the windows and looking in through the turf walls, Gandalf Cracker, your garden looks so bright. Yes, answer dismay. I do really like it and of everything, sweet old crap, but I believe I knew with vacation you intend go with your plan, then I have changed closed. That I made mon long time ago. Well, it's useless to mention that anymore. Just stick to your think arrived at our entire idea, and I hope it works out for the best for you and everyone else. I hope so. In any case, I want to have fun on Thursday, and I'll share my small joke with anyone who find it funny. Gan daisies hook his head in Astonus snapdragons everywhere. The following day, additional carts rolled up Bill Walls. There may have been some complaints about the hill, and more carts there. Locally, often that same week, Baggins started receiving orders for all types of luxury goods or services that may be acquired in Hobbitron or people in the Nego. The neighborhood, whether in Bywater, became excited. They started marking off the days on the calendar, and they eagerly awaited Thesman, who anticipates receiving else.es soon, started to flow out, and the post office in Hopton was closed, and volunteer assistant postmen were sent to the Bywater post office because it was snowing. Sis Alley was constantly ascending the slope with hundreds of people saying, "Thank you. I will definitely." There was a notice on the other gate that said entry was only permitted during parties. Business, even if they had or feigned a party, was rarely permitted in the Arilbo. Busy composing invites, checking off responses, and creating some of his own personal preparations since Gandalf awaited him. He was out of sight one morning when the sons awoke to locate the sizable field with the ropes and closed it to the south of Bilbo's front door. A unique entrance was made for tents and pavesnowing to the road's bank, where broad steps and a big white gate were. The courteous hobbit families of Bagshot Row, which was definitely next to the field, were old Gaffer Gamgee, who was highly intrigued and generally envious, and even the tents started to move while the party ended up working in his garden. Bilbo, particularly, was in an enormous pavilion located up there, so vast that the tree crew in the field stood proudly close to one end of it, arriving in. Lights on the chief's head table were suspended from the ceiling. To the hobbit's imagination, branches were even more promising, and a huge outdoor door was built for a draft of the chefs from each pavilion. Field's north corner, and dining establishments from kilometers away came to support the dwarfs. Other strange people who were housed at Bag Enduration rose to its height, but on Wednesday, the eve of that day, the weather turned over. There was a lot of party anxiety on Thursday, September 20th, when the sun rose, the clouds dissipated, the flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Botheg Field referred to it as a party, but it was actually within. When entertainments were combined into one, almost everyone in the area was a small number of people who were accidentally left out of the invitation, but still showed up. So that did not issue. Other individuals from corner regions of the Shire were also questioned, and there were Bilbo met the dwarves, including some from outside the borders, and additions at the new Widsgate. Personally, he distributed gifts to everyone, and the latter were the ones that returned by a different route and entered again the gate. Hobbits independently give gifts to others. Typically, birthdays are as extravagant as this one. Occasion, but in reality, the system in Offbasin and Bywater wasn't that bad. Since someone's birthday fell on each way of the year, every hobbit in those there was a reasonable possibility that at least one would be present at Lennox once a week. Yet they never grew weary of them. This time, the gifts were exceptionally powerful. The hobbit kids were so thrilled that they nearly forgot for a second. There were toys related to food that they had never seen before. Man and them had been stunning, and several were clearly extraordinary, purchased a year earlier, and had traveled from the mountain and others, and were actually dwarfs when all of the guests were greeted. There were music games, dances, and songs when they eventually entered the bar. Moreover, there were 3 official food and drink events: lunch, tea, and soothe for dinner. although lunch and tea were distinguished primarily by the fact that at other times, when everyone was seated and dining together, there were just a lot of people eating and drinking non-stop from 11 o'clock until when the time works began at 6:30, and Gandalf was the performer. Not only were they before them, but they were also created and manufactured by him. He was extraordinary, with the special effects, set pieces, and rocket flights by him. There was also an ample supply of crackers and squibs. Goblin greeted. Wrappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, and thunderclaps are all excellent, and Gandalf's artwork got Best Drink Th Century. They're supper rockets that sounded like a chorus of dazzling birds singing voices, green trees with those smoke on their trunks, and leaves that spread out like a full the divergence of spring, and its gleaming branches fell luminous flowers on tuntled hobbits, vanishing with a delightful aroma. The performer paints mountains of butterflies right before they touch their flipped faces. Ra's been transformed into pillars of colored fires that glittered as they flew toward the treetops. Flying failures sailing ships, or eagles, swans, and squibs were a yellow shower and a crimson thunderstorm. A forest of silver pears appeared amid the rain, and they abruptly leaped into the air with a shout like a weary army and descended into the ocean once again with a sound like singing snakes. Then there was one final surprise in Bilbo's honor, which surprised the hobbits. The floodlights went out just as Gandalf had expected. The smoke branches took on the appearance of a distant mountain and started to glow at the Coroma. Golden flame emerged from the pinnacle, spewing green and scarlet flames. Out the faces. Dragon was not life-sized. His jaws produced incredibly realistic flames. Roar's eyes glared at the treetops, and he flew 3 times above the thunderstorm. The dragon passed like an express, the thunderstorm. Many of them fell down on their faces. The train made a sharp bend and exploded over by Waterwraith with a loud noise. The signal for supper is an explosion. The agony instantly left Bilbo, and the squatting hobbits finally got to their feet. A magnificent dinner was served to the hobbits, with the exception of the big pavilion, the venue for the unique family dinner celebration, which was attended by only the 12 people who were invited to the tree. The term 12 was not taken into consideration, although the hobbits also termed it one gross, appropriate for human usage. The visitors were chosen from among all the households at Bilbo, and the inclusion of a few close unrelated buddies dodged were related. Numerous juvenile hobbit faces were present in Gandalf, and present with parental consent, hobbits were noisy with their kids over stay explosion, particularly when there was an opportunity of providing them with a complimentary meal. Raising young hobbits required many TS, and Brandy was there, aloof with a pavilion of bags and muffins. There were several grubs who were Bilbo Baggins' relatives, several of his Chubb's relatives, and a number of burrows, Brockhouses, Goodbodies, horn blowers, and proud people. Gross. Ulges, brace girdles, and some of these were only distantly related to feet. Bilbo and a few others barely visited Hobbiton before close. Sackville Bones were not related. They resided in isolated areas of the Shire. Even though Andotanu and his wife Lelia were there, they laid back. Frodo, but the invitation card printed in golden pen was so exquisite, they believed they couldn't refuse. Aside from Bilbo, their cousin, who had been a FOA specialist for many years, and his table were well known, so the Bagginses and Boffins participated in an enjoyable feast, but they feared Bagginser relatives' address. Host an unavoidable object that he might bring fragments of what are referred to as poetry, and perhaps following a glass or two would make reference to his animatic, absurd adventures. The guests had a real, feat-y journey, and were not disappointed. Feast Hobbiton, before activating Form O Baggins entertainment. Rich, plentiful, and diverse. For a long time, Shire District's purchasing of groceries virtually stopped. Subsequent wee Bilbo, as Bilbo's catering had exhausted the majority of it, made exquisite the difference that there were stores, cellars, and warehouses for kilometers around. Almost immediately following the feast, however, at that time, the majority of the company was in a tolerant attitude. They referred to this pleasant SD address to filling up the corners. While enjoying their favorite, they were ready to listen while sipping their favorite beverages and muncork on their favorite treats. Anything, and to apply adventures. Let's stop, my love. People started to rise, in Bilbao disappointed. Feast, they yelled, and continued to repeat entertainment, as if they were hesitant to allow there on his own counsel. Bilbo departed and went to stand on the stop, beneath the lights. Tree. The lantern's light fell upon his shining on his embroidered silk waist. His face's golden buttons shone. Coat. They could all see him, standing around with one hand in his trouser and the other in the air. He started, "Pocket my dear Baggins and bins." Once more attitude with my beloved Tuck and Brandy's bucks, grubs, chubs, bears, and horn. Blowers, buggers' favorites, brace girdles, and proud and elderly hobbit screamed, Foot's proud feet. From the rear of treats to rally, his name was Pavilion, and he was well dissolved. Both of his big, unusually furry feet were the Bilbo, and my nice Sackville bags were repeated by table-proud feet. That I am finalizing to bag end, as it is my 111th birthday. They screamed and banged joyful lights, wishing everyone a merry return. What is shining on the tables? For Wastely, they enjoyed this type shine, and which was brief, and it goes without saying that I hope everyone is having as much fun as yere that I hear chants of yes and no horns, trumpet bins, lotes, or other musical instruments as mentioned. There were a lot of young hobbitshorn. Reds of musical crackers were popular. The majority of products had the Dale mark on them. On them, that didn't really tell most of hobbits, but they all thought they were well-deserved. Little, yet flawlessly the Bagginses. In fact, in one corner, the Brandybucks and young TK feet. Summing Uncle Bilbo has completed because he has stated every birthday. It needed to be said, and then he got up impromptu Master Everard Tuck return. Mellet started a joyful dance with the orchestra. Brandybuck sat down at a table and held Beeland, starting to perform a lovely dance on the Springle ring, but instead aggressive. But Bilbo had not completed stealing a child's lute. He beat 3 instruments by making a commotion. He yelled, "I hobbits to EP long," and everyone cheered. Gathering, I have gathered you all for a reason. Something that he stated that this left an impression. There was nearly no sound, and indeed for 3, 1 or 2 of the token inside up their ears. First and foremost, I want to express how much I love you, everyone. and that 111 years is not long enough to have a civ among such wonderful and admirable people. Huge outburst of approval from Hobbits impromptu. Half of you I like less than half of you, and I like you less than I like the orchestra. This was surprising and challenging, with scattered applause, but the majority were springing to the issue and determining whether it resulted in a second to come home. My birthday. Cheers. I should state our birthday commotion because it is, of course, also the birthday of Frocheard. Phew. And here, who enters adulthood and inheritance today. A few hetchied applause from the elders, and some of jolly old Frodo's bumeandries from the juniors, the Sackville Toctus, frowned and peered at the significance of their arrival. Together, we score you, his inheritance. 140 four-year numbers were selected to match this outstanding, if I may use the people. The sum is 1 gross. No cheers. Many of the visitors found you to be absurd. The Sackville Bagginses, in particular, were humiliated. Believing this, they had only been requested to enter the new scattered bar. Such as goods in a package one is really disgusting and uncivilized. Term, and if I may use it, it's all so ancient the anniversary of my arrival at Esgaroth on Along by barrel, however. I didn't remember that it was the birthday. I was only 51 at the time. So birthdays didn't seem andrushly. The banquet was magnificent. But even though there was a severe cold at the moment, the only thing I could say at the moment was, "You very Bagginses," which I now repeat more. Hi, I sincerely appreciate arrival, tending my small gathering inheritance to stance. Quiet, they were all afraid that a Poe outstanding was about to impending, and they were growing Ross. Tear cheers. Why wouldn't he shut up? Bilbo did not absurd. Allow them to Baggins is particular. However, he hesitated for a second, the beard, and lastly he said, "I would like to make an announcement," which was his final statement. So uncivilized, loudly that everyone sat up, even though ancients were still, I regret to inform you that, as I have stated, Barrelars is far too short a time to spend with birthdays my last day. I'm heading out immediately. He said goodbye, stepped down, and disappeared. A dazzling flash of brightness, and as they feed their eyes, everyone blinked. Eyes Bilbwas, as Utare Thobel. 144 shock hobbits smored K, unable to speak, while old Odo proudly took off his feet away from the insistence stamped. Followed by a deceased, there was a pause, but then, impending several deep breaths, each Baggins boss took brandy. Brock up. Good Buck Grub Chub Burrows Bulger Brace Gird Health. The foot and horn blowers started chatting it after I a third, widely acknowledging that the joke was terrible flavor, and additional food and beverage statements were required to help the visitors recover from shock, and the most well-said thing I ever uttered was probably annoyance, he's mad. With a few exceptions, even the TKEs believed that Bilbo's Act Day was for the time immediately. Of them assumed that his disappearance was ridiculous. Little more of an absurd joke, but Rory Brandybuck wasn't so confused. Neither aging nor visible had affected his daughter-in-law, Esmeralda, heard him say, "There's something fishy in it. I think that Mad Baggins is off, my dear. Deceased, dumb old idiot, but why?" He called loudly to Frodo to send the vit, but he had taken brandy. Frodo was the only person in the room who had a gaggle, when the wine was poured again. He had been sitting quietly next to Bilbo's vacant chair for a terrible disregard of all comments and inquiries, because he had found the comedy of course. Despite his behavior in the game, he found it hard to stay away from while he laughed at the guests' outraged surprise. He also felt profoundly upset when suddenly discovered how much he liked the old hobbit. Sadly, the Major is ridiculous. Visitors continue to eat, drink, and talk about Bilbo Baggins. Despite current and historical odds, the Sackville Baggins Frodo had already left in wrath and didn't want any more something fishy fingering. He ordered additional wine to Deard Ved. He rose and silently drained his own glass for the sake of, as for Bilbo's sack, he sneaked out of the Paim. Throughout his remarks, he continued to finger the gold in his magic ring, which, again, concealed for so long, was in his pocket. Years after he resigned put it on his finger, and he walked briskly back to his hole, never to be seen by another hobbit in Hobbit, and stood for a while grinning while taking in the noise of the pavilion and merry making in other areas of town. And then he entered, removing and folding his party attire. His embroidered hobbit, the coat, was wrapped in tissue paper, and put it away before hurriedly donning some bags, clothes, and secured a shabby leather Baggins Sahadi's waist. He hung a short swarth in a worn black layer on it. He removed an old cloak from a locked drawer that smells like mothballs, and Hood had been imprisoned as though they were extremely valuable. But they were so patched and stained to the point where their original hue was golden green. I assumed it was dark green, but they were a little pocket. Or after that, he entered his study and moved a bundle from a sizable, sturdy box. Wrapped in old clothing, a manuscript that is Hobbiton.UND, and a big, heavy, he placed the book and bundle in an envelope, and placed Mary top of a bulky bag that was standing there already, nearly full into the envelope. He slick attire, the golden ring, and its waistcoats, then sealed it and ad paper. It a Frodo at first he put it on the mantelpiece, but Sud closed out, removed it, and stuck it in his pocket. At that moment the waist opened, and Gondy came quickly in. "Hello," said the scabbard. "Honored if you would turn up, I'm locked to find you visible reaple mothballs." And sitting down in a chair, "I wanted to catch you and have a few final words. I suppose you feel everything has gone off splendidly and according to plan." "Yes." I discernible through that flash was surprising. "It quite startled me. Let's give the others a little addition of your own. I suppose it was you have wisely kept box. Ring's secret all these years, and it seemed to me necessary to give your heavy something else that would seem to explain your sudden vanishment and would spoil my joy." "You are an interfering old busybody," laughed Bilbo, "but I slip it high so best as usual I do when I know anything, but I don't feel too sure to Frodo. His first affair has now mantelpiece. Final point you have had you and me and alarmed, or offend, at most of your relation, opened at Oven Gandalf Shire. Something say about for 9 days or 99 more likely off. You going any further visible? Replied, I need a holiday, a very long chair. As I have told you before, probably a permanent holiday. I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I don't mean to. And I've mad toll arrangements that old gone thought. Don't look it surprising. Ginning to startle me. My heart of heathers. LL preserve indeed, he snorted. Suppose all the Soho had stretched if you rang. What I mean, like years, that has been scraped over to touch bread. That can't be right, I need a change or something. Suddenly, and closely at him, it doesn't seem right, busybody. D-Thought laughed 80 Bilbo. After all, I believe your plan is probably the best. Well, anything that comes to mind anyway. I want about mountains, especially mountains, and the final somewhere where I can rest in peace and quiet without a lot of tourists prying around and the string of confounded visitors hanging around 9 days. I'm likely somewhere when any further. Yes, my am. Okay, I have Thugga holiday, ending for I holiday. I lived happily ever before, to the end. Permanence Gandalf laughed, I hope he will, but in fact, I read the boot. However, it ends arrangements, ears to Gandalf. Oh, has read Soit already as far as it has gone. You keep an eye on Frodo preserved. Yes, I will snort. Why often can't you spare them stretched? Come with me. Of course. If I ask him. In fact, he scraped once just before the party. But he doesn't really want to yet. I want to see the wild country again. Andre, I die in him. You know, mountains, but seem right. In love, thoughtfully. No, higher kneel. Woods and fields, and our rivers are the best. Well, be comfortable here, I anyway. Ing everything to him of again. Gandalf a few elements. I hope he will be happy when chance used to be on his own. It's time he was his own, praying now everything said, and the ring as well. You agree that you remember? Well, yes, I suppose so, Stammerbook. Elbio, where is it in a nice envelope for it? Must know, said Bilbo impatiently. They're on Thistlepiece. Well, no, here it is. He will. But he hesitated. Isn't that odd now he sends? So? To himself, yet to come Fredo. You have why shouldn't you already? Case Gandalf is gone. Read again very hard at be Frodo. Won't you? Are you? Yes. Will use his eyes, I think Bilbo is spare. Quietly, I should leave item. Of course you want him. Yeah, in fact, and no. Now it comes, just I don't like parting or anything with it at all, I may say God. I don't really see why do you want to go to mountains? A serious change came to his voice. It was sharp with suspicion about fields and little rivers, ways badgering me about my there. But you have never bothered me with the other things, the elements on my journey. No? But I had badger, you said Gandalf, I wound. Ed the truth. It was import master. I see rings are well mag Gandalf, and they are well, curious. I was seriously ill. Yes, your ring, you so. Stammered still, where should I like to know where it must be? No, go wandering impatiently, as I think you wish. It quit well. Not enough, you won't have any hesitation. Owls I'm odd. T mistaken Bilbo flushed himself. There was an anecdote in his eyes. His kindly face grew hard, why not he cry? And at that business, is it of yours anyway to eyes? We think with my own things it is my own I fit. Behind, came to me, yes to, well, yes, and there is no need to get angry if I am. It is your fault. Aid Bay, it is mine. I tell you my oil. Should I want to? Wasp's face remained grave and attentive voice. Only a flicker in his deep endowed that you was startled, and indeed alarmed. Eitring, been called that before, yes, but not by you, but I say it now. And why journey, no? Gollum said Badger once. It's not his now, but thee, and I shall keep it, I say, getting stood up magically. Sternly, you will ban fool if you do. Bilbo, he said you make that clearing, the very say. you still would too much hold on. You let it go and twandering. Again, be yourself and be free. I'll do as I choose. You as I please say any more. Bilbo, now quitter Hobbit, said, flushed. All your long life we have been friends, and you owe me something come why. As you pride, do you give it up well if you are? Ring yourself and say so, cried Bilbo, but things, get it down, don't give it. I teach a song. Yes. Eyes, said Gandalf. Trade to the hilt of his small sword gone. Half's eyelashes will be its termin. Get angry. Esmwy, he said, precious eyes. That precious shall wizard. You will see Gandalf the Grative. Asked he took a step towards deep Hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall, and Manassan alarmed. It filled the litany. Bilbo said, "Dee away, Toby, you'll breathe now," his hand not, itching at his pocket at the same time for a while, facing one amean, and the AI kept the room tingling. God's eyes remained sternly, and you, the Hobbit, slowly his due. He relaxed, and he began to tremble. I don't know what you say over you. Gandalf, he said, you have you. Ever bingo? Like this before, what's all about it? Be mine, isn't it? I found it, and Gollum, please, have key Bilbo, if I hadn't now. Now it's not Hobbit, the elf who Gandalf is. He said I have never called friends and something, on either. I am promised standing to it. You but to help you. I wish yourself, Trousseau, greedy used, he turned away. The shadow passed. He seemed away, and he dwelled again to an old gray man bent and troubled with a small sword in hand. His hand overflashed. Sit sorry, he said, but I'm fucked. Sunran said if it were a ragging, I would then be bothered with it any more uncloaked. So growing on my mind lately, Hobbit, times I have felt it was like menacing at me. And I am always want true. To put it on and disappear, hard, wondering if it's safe. He pulled out to make sure. I tried locking it up, but I found I could room it ingle. Out in my pocket, I Daubington the Hobbit. Don't seem able to relax. Pee my head, then trust mine, said Gandalf. Is quite over you, Gondi, left behind. Stop possessing this. Is it to Frodo, and I will about. It termin, Bilbo it, food for 8, moment tense, and unshaved presently, he sighed all, RIT.HT, he said thief. Whatever hill. Then he shrugged his shoulders, Gandalf answered, rule after all neither. What this party business was all out you to T.O. give away, lots of birthdays you used, and somehow make it easier to pass them away at the same time, hasn't made it any easier in the end, but it would be a pity to his eyes. My sorry, Aisha said, it would quit so queer. He joked indeed it would take away the only point I ever saw in an affair, said Gandalf. Very well, said Bilbo islandly. To Frodo with all the rest, like a deep breath and me. I really must be starting, or someone else will disappear. TCH me I know. Said goodbye, and I can't bear to do it all over again. He picked up his bag and moved to the door. You still have the ring in your pocket? Sagno. Why, Zard, well, so I have, cried Bilbo, and my why. There, D. Gandalf. Edo, you'd better tup. Got and delivered it behind. Stop, that I'll be safe. Don't give Frodo a ring to me. Said Gafter, put it on the mantelpiece. It will ban fuse. Enough there till Frodo commissals. Right, wait for him Bill effort. Owl Thenlopus rugged, as he was about to set Iratherol. CK is all. jerked back, and the packet fell on the about. Before he could pick it up, the wizard stooped and seized it and set it into place. A spasm of anger passed swiftly over the hobbit's face again, and suddenly it gave way to a pity look of Ralph, and a laugh. That's what he said now. Jokio indeed. I went out into the hall. Bilbo chose his favorite stye-affair, and said stand. Then he said, Bilbo, dwarf CTO Frodo, of different rooms, are they deep breathing? Is everything ready? Ask starting. Everything packed and labeled everything. They said goodbye. Well, let's start then. He stepped out again. Front door. It was a fine night. The black sky was dotted with stars. He looks into his pocket and sniffles the air well. Fun. What fun to be off again, off on the road, why if there's others. This is why you'd have actually been hoping for 4 years. No ing at his old home and bone, said the door farewell gan mantelpiece. For the present Bilbo, take car till your Salcoms are old enough Anaheim, perhaps wise enough to take care. I do just as I don't worry about me. I'm clocking in now, as I have ever been, which is saying a big deal. But the time has come. I am wizard wept off my feet at final, he added, and then in a quiet voice, as if to swiftly sing softly in the dark again, the road goes ever on, and on down from the Entrana, where, well, even now that, he said, now I'm as gone, and I must follow if Hall is chasing it with eager feet from joint stand, wider whistled, and any paths and errands me of. And with then, I cannot say, he paused silent, everything hen, without additional word. He turned Andy from the field's lights, answered well, and started. The three friends circled into the hilly area and trotted down the long slope behind him. The way he starts, over a low area in the hedge at the bottom, and proceeded to the meadows, singing into the night. This is where Gandalf stayed for a long time, listening for the wind goodbye, saying, goodbye, grass, bidding farewell, my love, as I follow farewell to Gandalf. Bilbo muttered, presently, Bilbo, till our next of you, and left. Inside, Frodo came in soon enough, took care, and found care. Did you? Deep in contemplation, has he gone? Said, yes, been, and Gandalf replied, big deal. The last thing I came for was till this evening. Fatto finalized at it, just a joke, but I knew deep down that he truly intended to go. But he would often make jokes about important things that made me begin to not want to go off. I believe you have wanted to leave a great silence, he remarked. Gandalf, don't worry too much. It's doing well now. He left you a note there. Frodo looked at the time after removing it from the whole piece. But did I believe if you don't open it, you'll discover his will and all the other paperwork within? The wizard, you are Baggins master, and I hope you'll come upon a golf hedge. He departed from me. Frodo cried, Meadows the ring, that I question why I would still be helpful on time might, or might not say Gondal. Thus I wouldn't use if I were you. But don't tell anyone about it. And I'm going to bed now, since Frodo, the master of Bag End, sensed it. His aging responsibility to bid the visitors farewell after hearing about weird income that extended across the field now. But Frodo told would only respond, no doubt. Everything in the evening. The midnight carriages will be clarified in the morning. One by one, they rolled for the essential people. Arrangement was important. but extremely dissatisfied hobbit gardeners, and grimly removed in wheelbarrows those who had unintentionally star-marked. At night, the hobbits rose instead when the sun rose. As the morning weather was, folks arrived and started with directives to remove the mantelpiece table-shed chairs, as well as the plates, drinks, knives, and spoons, the crackers and crumb within. Aights and the flowering bushes master, paper, gloves, handkerchiefs, 4 golden luggage, and food that hasn't been consumed by the ring-thing, and then several other people are helpful. Ginses, boffins, and bulges without commands in TS, as well as other visitors that were staying or residing. There around noon, when even the healthiest people were out and about, a sizable throng was present at Bag End without invitation, but not Frodo, who was unexpectedly watching on the stair, grinning but appearing somewhat worn out. Concerned doubt eated each caller, but didn't have much more to say than previously his morning. To every question was just as far as I can people. Bilbo Baggins has vanished. Have solid knowledge of several of the gardeners. Asked to enter the building as Bilbo had left messages for them. They entered the hall, where a variety of parcels were stacked. Pockrows, and tiny pieces of furniture, and on each one thereby there were multiple labels for this. Senor Adelard took from Bilbo on an individual basis. A spoon had removed numerous unmarked umbrellas for Dora Baggins in a memory box's lengthy love letter from Bilbo on a huge waste paper basket. Dora was the old, consuming female relative of Drogo and his sister. She arrived old and had penned countless commands for almost 50 years from Milo Burrows in the hopes that he would be there from BB using gold ink and a pen. Bottle Milo never responded about Uncle's letters for Angelica's use. Bilbo, in a circular convex mirror, was not youthful, bagging, and too definitely considered her face shapely for the assortment. Out. Go brace. A contributor's girdle on an empty bookshelf. Hugo was an ex-borrower of books and a bad returner. Lelia just bought bags for them as a gift on a silver vanished. Bilbo thought she had obtained a significant number of toast spoons while his time away on his former, when Forney Lelia arrived later that day. She was well aware of that immediately took spoons, but she also took the point. This is just a small portion of the gifts that Bilbo received, rather packed with items, the basis of his lengthy life. Hobbit holes were a common occurrence, can become disorganized, which is why the tradition of giving paper birthday gifts was mostly accountable, not to mention that the gifts were constantly brand new. One of countless Madhams of Forgotten uses had made the rounds of the district, but Bitha typically retained the gifts he gave and bought fresh ones. Received, the original whole was now being somewhat confused by all the different Partmirs. Bilbo himself wrote Baggins bells too, and some of them had some sort of point or some joke, but basically the majority girdle item was placed where they would be needed and welcomed the less fortunate returners, particularly those from Bagshot Bar, who did great job. Old Gaffer Gamgee received 2 bud-off potatoes and a new bottle of creaky ointment and a woolen waistcoat in exchange for a lot of hospitality. Old Rory Brandy Bark received that bottle. Of Ancient Vineyards, a robust southern red wine Farpoint, now fully developed as established by Bilbo's father, Rory, voted received Italy Fellow and showed him a great deal of forgiveness. Following The Hobbit was plenty of every occurrence from the first bottle. Frodo, the book illustrations, and of course, all of the chief tribe mostly, and there was still more than enough furniture in his possession, brand new. No indication or reference to cash or jewelry was given away, but neither a penny piece nor a glass bead. Frodo had a very difficult time that afternoon. There was a false report that the entire household was being given away for partings. Wildfire, and soon there were a lot of people there who had nothing to do there, but laid some are ripped off and mixed up since they couldn't be kept out. Conflicts erupted when some individuals attempted to trade and transact in the hallway, and others attempted to steal little products that weren't addressed to the road to Newgate, which was obstructed by them, or anything that was undesired or observed. Amidst the chaos, with hand cards and barrows, the Fro bottles retired to vineyards, a time when Sackville wine arrived. We angrily begged to see his buddy Ma Bilbo's buck. He left her to watch over things. Frodo Merry bowed courteously and stated, "I'm not in the mood." "You mean to say that he is sleeping and concealing the bottle case, Lelia? We intend to see him. Mary left them a long time ago. Tell him." Even though they had time to find the heartwarming gift of spoons, their tempers did not get better. When Ori finally entered the study, Frodo was seated at a table with he seems disinclined to see the several chairs in front of him. At any rate, Sackville was bagging, and he got up, fumbling with his free in his pocket. However, he spoke in a quiet tone. The Sackville Baggins were very offensive, to put mildly. They started by giving him terrible deals for several things between buddies, priceless and unmarked items, to which Frodo responded that only the Baggins-directed items were being distributed, and they claimed the entire affair was extremely unfair. "One thing is that you're doing incredibly well. Well, for the adoption of Willu, Bilbo's heir would have carefully read the will and snorted. Sadly, it was quite obvious. It was in accordance with Hobbit legal conventions, which needed, among other things, that the 7 red ink witness signatures had been prevented once more. Wife more. After 60 years of waiting, he waved his fingers at the spoons and fiddlesticks and under Frodo's nose, but Lelia was difficult to get rid of. Fred is miffed. From the study a short while later to check on the situation. The situation, her wandering around the area, exploring crevices and tapping the floors, led him out of the property after relieving her of a number of lovely but useful items that had inadvertently dropped inside her umbrella. Here she appeared as though she was contemplating a heartbreaking farewell. "Remark, farewell," she managed to say. "You'll live to regret it, young," as she turned around on the step. "Why didn't you step up, fellow? You don't belong here. Did you hear that? You're a brandy buck, Baggins. If you like, Baggins." That was an insult. When Frodo closed the door behind her, it was Mary Brandybuck who gave a compliment, and so forth. They circled the hallway and expelled 2 boffins and young hobbits, and Frodo also got into a fiat with Bolger, who was causing holes in one of the cellar's walls. Old Odo and cellar's walls are both proud. Grandson who had starved proud to jing in the bigger pantry because he believed there was a repeat of the story of Bilbo and Elf, which piqued interest and hope for fabled wealth that had been unexplainably acquired, if not fatally sick-gotten, as everyone is as sick of the discovery. Unless he defeats Sand Discovery, search is stopped. It's time to close the stop door. I fell on a chair in the hallway after being shoved out. He told Mary to lock the door and not open it. Nobody, even if they bring a bite. Today, Ram then proceeded to refuel with a tardy cup of tea. He had just taken a seat when there was a gentle knock at the front of the tea table. Dorlelia once more probably stated that she must have had a pretty unpleasant idea and returned to say, "It's okay." He continued with his teas. The knock was heard stronger, but it was his answer. "If you don't let me in, Frodo, I'll answer that the wizards had arrived at the window. My surprise," he said, "I'll blow window. I'll right down your hole and out through the hill." Frodo ran out of the room to the door-hill. Daff wailed for half a minute. I assumed it was Law when the door came. "I'll forgive you, Belia," but I spotted Hyena, giving a while back, in the direction of Bywater. A pony traps back. Face that would have made fresh, to be honest. I almost tried on Bilbo's midreshet. She had already almost made me gag. I wanted to vanish, but didn't do that till Alf sat down, but watch out for that ringing. Finally, part of what I've come to say is Abring at Odo. Well, what do you know about it? I've just heard what Bilbo told me so far. Described how he discovered it and used it. On his Fard Nay, that is, the tale Oh, that's not it. He told the dwarves, Wonder said, and wrote in his book that Frodo would soon tell me said real story. He said that you had bugged him till he told me aft story, to vet it. There should be no secrets between us, Frodo. So I'd be in, now too. But they are not to go any further. It's mine, he continued. Anyway, that's intriguing, remarked Gondal. What a continued night. If you're referring to creating all of the stuff for a thought, I believe the real narrative to be the stuff for plan present, and I failed to see the purpose of Bilbo was not likely to change it in any way. Nevertheless, I found it really strange, so I believe way. Strange things can happen to those who possess their treasures if they employ them. Let them serve as a warning to you to use it with extreme catches. It might possess powers beyond I don't understand why you're cautioning yourself to disappear when, beyond Frodo, I didn't respond to the magician. I've only recently started to think about the ring, partly since last no need to worry tonight. But if you follow my guidance, you will last sparingly or never at all. At the very least, I implore you to use it in anything that will allay your suspicions. I say once more, keep it private and secure. You're very what are you frightened of, mysterious? I'm not sure, so I'll answer everyone I might be able to share with you when I return. I'm leaving at once. Here is his farewell to the gift he received. Suddenly, Fredo, why did I assume you would be here? For I received it, I was anticipating out. I meant to help, but I've had to modify my keep in mind that even though I've been gone for a long time, I will return to you as soon as you see me. I'll be there. I'll sneak in discreetly, because I frequently visit the Speaking Honestly Onthere. I've discovered that I've turned into unpopular. The people even accuse me of disturbing the peace and becoming a nun. I could spirit Bilbo away, or worse, if you're curious. Some individuals said nuisance that S supposed to be a plot between you and me to Jecurious, his wealth. You mean Ewan Lelia, Frodo. How abhorrent if I could have Bilbo back and go wealth. Being in the country, I would give Howam Bag End and everything else. I adore the Shire with him, yet I start to desire that I had visited, and I'm not satisfied I'll ever see him again. I said Gandalf once desire, and I wonder how many other goodbye. Now take care of you again. Do keep an eye out for me, particularly at unexpected strangers. Goodbye, and I'll see you at the door. He waved his hand one more time for leaving at an unexpected pace, but Frodo believed the elderly wizard appeared oddly hunched, as though he were unexpected enormous weight. The evening was drawing near, and his hooded form swiftly disappeared into it as a long time before the twilight Frodo saw him again. Chapter 2 of Time. The shadow of Into the Conversation continued into 9, or perhaps 99, days again. Topic of Mr. Bilbo Baggins' second appearance was covered in for a year and a half, 99 to bite on, and in fact, the entire Shire day, and endured for a lot longer, being a fireside tale for youthful hobbits and later a Shirejan, who once disappeared with a flash and a bang fireside as surfaforth jewel-filled bags and gold, became Baggins' Legion favorite characters and persisted long after all. Although actual event and were forgotten, the prevailing sentiment in that Bilbo in the area had always been pretty. Finally, Crack had gone completely crazy and fled into the hand Bilbo, fallen into a river or lake pretty blue, and reached a terrible but barely premature demise. The majority of the blame was placed on Gandalf, who would settle down and get some hobbit, sensing only that damned wizard would leave young Frodo alone. Oni said, and it seemed that the magician left Frodo alone, and he made peace. Down, but the hobbit sense alone, the allotment was barely perceptible. In fact, he immediately started to keep up his odious reputation by refusing to go into mourning, and he hosted a celebration for Bilbo's 11th birthday the following year. Birthday, however, it fell short because 2 guests were invited, and there were multiple meals, where year days covered, however, and drinks were drenched, like hobbits claim that while we were a little taken aback, Frodo continued the tradition of yearly celebration of Bilbo's Hobbit until they grew accustomed to it. He claimed that he did not believe Bilbo was ceased when they inquired about his whereabouts. As Bilbo had done, he shrugged his shoulders and lived alone, but he had a lot of friends, particularly whereabouts ones. The majority of hobbits are descended from the anal one, Dayuk, who had a fondness for F.C.O. Boffin and Frogar Bolger, were ones that Ently in and out of Bag End, and Bilbo was 2 of these, but Peregrine was his best friend. Typically, Tuck referred to Pippin as a merry merid, Dew was Brandybuck's rewasing, but that was rarely recalled by that old friend. Frequently wandered alone, Frodo occasionally walked across the Shire with them, and he was rarely spotted far from home. Much to the surprise of normal people, while strolling through the forest anthems in the starlight, Merry and Pippin had a suspicion that, like Bilbo, he occasioned people. Not to see the elves, but as time passed, people started to observe that Frodo also had external attations of good preservation, keeping the some people have all the physical attributes of a strong, active hobbit, much like his twins. They claimed luck, but it wasn't untethered until they reached the typically sober age of 50, at which point they started to believe it was twins. The initial shock, the queer Frodo Disco Frodo that he was his own boss. And Mr. Baggins of Baggin was pretty pleasant for a few minutes, content, and did not give much thought to the future, yet he was party boss, that aware of his remorse for not accompanying Bilbo was growing rapidly. He occasionally wondered about the untamed areas and unusual things, especially in the fall. In his dreams, he saw mountains he had rapidly climbed before, and he started saying, "Maybe I'll cross the river myself." Day to fall, the opposite side of his brain consistently responded, "Not yet." Thus, it continued until his 40s were coming myself. A 50th birthday approached. He believed that the number was close to 50 Waziat, thickened in some way or foreboding. At any rate, adventure had unexpectedly fallen at approach. The old route felt too good, and Bilbo Frodo started to grow restless. Examined maps and pondered what may be found beyond their borders. Shagged at odd maps revealed largely white areas outside of its boundaries, which tended to stray more. Field, more frequently by himself, Merry and his other pals attentively revealed him frequently as he walked and conversed with the odd wayfarer more. Started to show up into there were whispers that the pals were experiencing weird events outside, and Gandalf hadn't yet shown up or sent a message. Over the years, Frodo collected all the news he could about the elves that were rarely seen in the Shire. In the Shire, they were suddenly observed moving westward, traveling through the woods in the nighttime without going back, but they were departing from Middle-earth and weren't worried about it despite its distance westward. There were dwarfs on the route in peculiar nuance. The old east-west route ended at the Grey after passing through the Shire. It has traditionally been used by dwarfs and havens to go to their peculiar Blue Mountains. If they so desired, they served as the Hobbit's primary source of news from far-off places. Generally speaking, Hobbits said no, and dwarves said little about the mountains. Frodo now frequently encounters odd dwarfs from afar, nations fleeing to the west, places. They were in distress, and some of the questions were talked in Whisperlight, the adversary and Mordor's territory. That name, which Ishafar, were only familiar with from terrible ancient legends, was a shadow in the talk of their recollections, but it was unsettling territories. It appeared that the evil White Council had expelled authority from Mirkwood, but had returned in greater strength in Mordor's ancient strongholds. The Dark Tower has been restored. Freeville, the power was reportedly spreading widely in Mirkwood, where wars were expanding far to the east and south. Concern that trolls were no longer restored and that orcs were repopulating in the Highlands. Dull-witted and crafty, and equipped with terrible weaponry and whispers of the south. Residential more horrible than all were whispered. Capabilities, but they didn't have a nation. This led to the common hobbits, but even the terribly solitary and depressed of them started to hear odd stories and whispered. They traveled to the borders for work and saw odd. One evening in the spring, the discussion in the Green Dragon at Bywater on Frodo's 51st birthday demonstrated that even in the cozy center of the Shire, the majority of hobbits continued to chuckle. Sam G. Greened Dragonted Bywater next to them, Fire, and Ted Sandman, the miller's son, stood across from him. Other rural, you do hear weird things these days when you listen to the chuckle.ts chat. Just to be sure, Sam said, Ted them. If you pay attention, I can hear stories from fireside and childhoods a home. You can definitely respond if I want to. Who made the stories? Sam and I decided that some of them contain more reality than you may realize. Anyway, thanks. Take the dragons now. Ted, I won't, you said. I heard about them while I was a youngster. But since there is only one dragon in the world, there is no reason to realize them. Thanks, Bywater. He knew, obtaining abroad it's okay, answered Sam, laughing along with the take a nap. But what about these three men, or giants, as you would refer to them? Do claim that a tree-sized one was recently spotted broad beyond the North Moors. Back, for whom is my counsel? He moves up north and works for Mr. Boffin at Giant's Hill. In preparation for them, hunts he observed. One claims he did, but your hows are constantly claiming he was moored, and perhaps he perceives how. GS that aren't there, but this one was walking over hills to a step, and was as large as observed. I wager that if it was an inch, it wasn't an inch. She saw what appeared to be an elm tree, but this one isn't. I could tell. How couldn't have noticed an elm tree if there weren't any on the moors, he added. Ted, the crowd seems to be in a good mood, as there was some applause and laughter, despite the fact that Ted had scored a touchdown. You cannot deny, Sam, that people outside of our hall fast have witnessed queer padded. Ossing to keep in mind, think. Here are more people who are slaughtered. At the boundaries, they have never been busier. I've heard rumors that elves are heading west, and they do mention visiting the harbors beyond the towers. Sam gestured hazily with his arm, but neither he nor Anthe were aware of the distance to the sea beyond the ancient elves. Shire's western limits. Yet there was a long-standing custom that the White Havens, from which elven ships occasionally sail, were visible in the distance. Started out with no intention of returning. They are towers. They are departing from us and heading west across the water, half chanting the words while sadly shaking his head. Ted chuckled in the distance. That's nothing new. If you don't see why it matters, I don't believe the old stories. You allowed them to sweat. I promise you haven't witnessed them or anybody else in the shed doing so. Well, I'm not sure, Sam responded. In retrospect, he imagined he had once spotted an elf in the forest. He continued to hope one day to witness more of all the myths he had heard in his early years. He had always been fascinated by the bits and pieces of the elves that the hobbits knew. Most profoundly, some even exist in these sections where Hope learns about the fair people and receives news about them. Steerly Hat Mr. Baggins, with whom I currently work, informed me that they were sailing. He has some new edge of elves, much as old Mr. Bilbo, the score of the conversations I had with him as a little boy. Oh, they're them. Ed claimed that Bilbo was cracked in the least amount of ways. If you get your sailing rotos cracks, you won't ever be without moonshine. I'm a ward at home, but you're doing well, buddies. Sam sat quietly and replied no. Both finished his mug and left noisily. Additionally, get away. Consider because there was a lot to do. In the bag and goth out, if the weather holds out tomorrow, he will have busybodies. Appeared, the grass was growing quickly, but Sam's thoughts were monolithically. After some time spent gardening, he sighed and stood up to go. It was early April, and following a period of intense rain, the sky was just clearing. A cold, pleasant evening was subtly fading into the night as the sun set. Under the eartheners, he strolled home through Hobbiton and up the Just. At the moment, a hill began to whistle quietly and thoughtfully. That following the clearing, Gandhi returned after a 3-year hiatus. Had been away, he visited Frodo for a short while, and after examining him closely, he went over the course of the following year or two thoughtfully, reasonably frequently arriving late at night and leaving without a visa. Or Sunrise seems mostly interested, but refused to talk about his own business or journeys. In minor updates regarding Frodo's condition and activities, but all of a sudden, reasonably, it had halted. More than 9 years had passed since Frodo had last heard of him, and he had lost all interest in him after coming to believe that journeys would never come back. Hobbits. But as Sam was making his way home that night, Twilight's familiar tap on the study window faded, and Frodo greeted his longtime companion. They gazed intently at one with astonishment and immense joy. "All right," answered Gandalf. "You look just as good as ever." "So do you, Frodo," he responded, but he was lately believed to be older and more serious. He probed him for companionship on the war and the wider globe, and they quickly found the joys deep in conversation, remaining up late into the night. "Breakfast, Frodo." In the morning, the magician was seated with Frodo. There was a bright fire in Osirius's open window. Hearth, but the wind was blowing a glow. The sun was warm. Everything appeared new toward the south, and the fresh springtime scene was glistening in Gandalf's imagination. A spring in the fields and on the tips of the trees' fingers. When Bilin ran out of bag and window, 80 years ago, if he hadn't had a handkerchief, his warmth might have been whiter, his beard and his face were more carefully lined, and his eyebrows might have been longer. Wisdom, but he smoked and blew smoke, and fingers were as bright as ever. Rings and quiet with tag name vigor and delight that he was smoking. Because even in the dawn light, Frodo is sitting motionless and lost in meditation. Sensed the ominous shadow longer that he saw that Gandalf had deliverables. Finally, he broke the "you started telling forever things last night" when there was silence. Regarding my rismoking, he remarked, and then you halted, stating that such issues should be left to meditation. The ring is dangerous far away, but don't you believe you should complete now? More hideous than anything, I suppose. Method in many respects addresses silence. Wizard, it's much more powerful than thought. So strong that it would ultimately completely tilt any mortal being who had it. He would be possessed by it for a long time. Complete it now. Often known as magic rings, suppose. Ted in the past. Naturally, they catch a variety of forms, some more powerful than others. It was full. The lesser rings contained simply the writings in the craft. Hadwin, and although they were considered time by the elven smiths, I still remember them. Mortals find it perilous. Past the big rings, the rings of power, they posed a fatal threat. While Frothers retains one of the big rings, he does not develop or acquire craft. He just keeps going through life till finally every minute is fatigue, and whether he then makes himself with the ring, he fades and eventually becomes invisible, permanently threatening Frodo, the Twilight, while being wary of the evil force that controls the rings. Yes, furthermore, assuming he is healthy and robust, connotation at first is neither good nor strong. Purpose will endure eventually, and the evil force will devour him. How horrible and invisible. Another extended period of silence was broken by the sound of Sam Gamgee mowing the lawn. Rings entered from the garden and said of Frodo, "Probust have you known this?" Length and the extent of strong Bilbo realized that he only told, "I'm sure you said, will never have given you anything." He believed Gandalf to be dangerous. Despite my promise to take care of you, he found Frodo to be extremely lovely and incredibly helpful when needed, and if this wasn't, he claimed that it was growing on him, which was beyond his thoughts. Sadie was constantly concerned about it, but he was unaware that the ring was Gandalf. Even if he had discovered that the object required maintenance, it always appeared to be the same. It changed size or weight in a way that wasn't a way, and might abruptly fall off a finger, which is strange. Yes, he did warn me about that in his previous letter. The letter mentioned Frodo. I've always kept cause. Its chain really wisely stated scandal, but Bilbo never related it to the ring in his lengthy life. Same as rather proud of himself and claimed away. He credit for that. He appeared thin and stretched. He was becoming restless and agitated. Previously that the ring was gaining power. How long have you been a part of all of this? Frosted again. I know a lot about Frodo that only the wise know, but if you want to say that I know, I'm still not sure how that may be said that there's a last exam to make, but I don't question it anymore. When did I start to ponder? Looking back in time, let me say, as you can see, that yet again, the White Council expelled the Dark Power. Prior to the Battle of Five Armies, Bilbo discovered his ring, a glorious one. However, upon my heart, I was still unsure of it. I frequently pondered how Gollum got a magnificent ring. It was evident from the first, after which I heard Bilbo's peculiar tale of victory. And when I finally learned the truth, I was shocked. I immediately realized that he had been attempting to assert his claim to the ring beyond. I doubted that the lies were too similar for Gollum's birthday present. It was evident to me that the ring had a mysterious power that immediately began working on its Key of Victory.ch. It was the first serious warning I had when things were shocking. When things were going well, I frequently told Bilbo that these rings were preferable if left unused, but I was furious because I couldn't present them from him without doing anything else, causing more harm than I have the authority to. In any case, I could only observe and wait. I might have sought advice, Sauron the White, but I was always connected to something. Rings never heard of him, so he questioned Frodo. Who am I? Passive received were before. Although he is great among the Gandalf hobbits, they are not heels that earn. He is the head of the council and the head of my order. Although he has extensive knowledge, his pride has run with it, and he treats any interference with something great and small as is. He has been studying the Vince for a long time before attempting to uncover its lost mysteries. But he would tell you concerning when the rings were discussed in council. Ordered IT went to sleep when the Lord of his Rings spoke against my anxieties, yet uncomfortably continued to observe and wait, and everything appeared to be fine with, yes, Bilbo, and the years went by, and it appeared that not to touch him, the mysteries had no symptoms of aging, fell on me once more, but I told myself that he has counsel. His mother's side of the family has a long history. But wait, and I waited. Yet he went that evening. He said and did things about this place which made me afraid. With no words, Saran was able to reassure me that something sinister was finally and deadly at work, having been there for most of the years. When the truth was revealed, no long-term damage was caused. Was there a history? But Frodo questioned if he would be okay in the evening. Is it not possible for him to rest in peace? Implying that he instantly felt we could Gandalf, but the only force in the universe that is fully and finally the rings and their impacts, and to the best of knowledge, no years in the world is fully aware of the only person who caused it. For Hobbit, among the wise, is myself. Although law is a small field of study, it is filled with surprises. My peace, fit as a butcher, but they can also be as tough as the elderly. I believe that some tree roots would certainly weather the rings for a lot longer than the majority of intelligent people would say that you shouldn't be concerned about. Naturally, BBO had the ring for myself and used it. It may take a long time for the effects to subside before he feels comfortable enough to view it. Once again, for example, a elderly might survive for years. He simply stopped being as happy as before he split then, with it since he relinquished it at the conclusion of his own. Give a crucial about it. I wasn't worried about Bilbo, dear. I feel the same way about it for you now, that he has let it go. Accountable. Ever since Bilbo's departure, I have been extroverted, worried about you and all of these charming, ridiculous, and defenseless hobbits. If the dark power triumphed, it would be a devastating blow to the world. Prepare, Shire, if all of your connolly foolish buggers, hornblowers, and buffins are girdler. The rest, in addition to the absurd Baggins, turned Frodo's slave. Shivered, but why should we be? He inquired as to why he had such a desire. To tell you the truth, slaves said defenselessly that here to now, Mark has completely disregarded the Hobbit's existence in this world. You should be grateful. How nice, jolly, and safe you are. He doesn't know if he will ever forget you, even if he has many absurdly helpful servants once more and slaves. As wretched slaves would appeal to him much more than hobbits themselves. There is such a thing as malice, but there is also joy and freedom. Revenge Frodo's retaliation. For I'm not sure how any of this relates to Bilbo, a grateful person entirely related to me and our ring. Gandalf, you are unaware of the true danger, it said. Yet, but you will. I wasn't servant when I was last here, but now is the moment to talk. Frodo pulled the ring from himself and gave it to me for a bit. He unlocked it and handed it to the freedom, the pocket where it was tied for the chain that hung from his belt. The wizard felt a strange weighty sensation, as if, in some way, it or Frodo himself didn't want Gandalf to touch it. It appeared to be composed of pure gold. Are there any talks? Visible. Asked. No, Frodo, there aren't any. It's pretty simple, and it never displays any scratches or indications of where it was. See how shocked and upset Frodo was when the magician threw it abruptly. He screamed and reached for the fire rod in the center of a bright corner. Gandalf restrained himself from using tongs. Wait, he replied in a firm tone, glancing at Frodo. Are you visible? Nothing seemed to alter. After a while, Gandalf shut the window shutters and drew the curtains. The room grew quiet and dark. Now closer to the windows, Sam's cheers could still be abruptly clacking. The wizard briefly emerged from the garden and gazed into the fire, after which he bent down and took the ring to the hearth using the tongs. Using the tongs, Frodo immediately took up, exclaimed, "That's pretty cool," altered Gandalf. Frodo got it on his shrinking, holding it up, saying, "Drool." The palm appeared thicker and heavier than before. When Frodo looked closely, he noticed fine lines that were slacking the finest pen strokes, running along the ring that appeared to produce lines of fire both inside and outside. The letters in a flowery cursive, they were dazzlingly brilliant, but distant as though Frodo were cool. Frodo remarked in a trembling voice, shrinking to read the fiery letters. Gandalf's voice did not say, "But I can tell you that Mordor is before us. But the letters are Elish from an earlier era, which I won't say here, but in strokes. This is one ring to govern them, is what is said. One ring to bring them outside. One ring to locate them. It's just 2 lines of a verse, yet the darkness binds them. 3 rings of the Elven kings are well known in Elven law. 7 for the dwarf lord's letters. Sky in their halls of 1 stone for Candark Lord on his dark day. And 9 for mortal beings destined to pervade. Throne in Mordor, where the shadows reside, and consecrate with 1 ring. 1 ring to Locused.m. 1 ring to deliver them. Link them all in the shadowy realm of Mordor, where the shadows he paused, then spoke slowly and deeply. Voice, the only ring that can control the law, the Master Ring. All of this is the 1 ring that he lost off centuries ago due to his strength greatly waning. He really wants it, but he can't have it. The silence seemed to stretch out a long time as Frodo remained still and silent. The hand that rises in the east like a black cloth threatens to swallow. He stumbled when he heard this. Did I get it? Remar deeply Dundal. That's a long one. The story's origins are in the Dark Ring, when only law masters are around. Remember, we should still be seated here if I told you the entire story. When spring had given way to winter, but I told you last night about the legends you have heard about Silent Euron the Great, the Dark Lord. It's true that he has risen once more. Released from his grip on the ring, old fastness in the dark toit of Mirkwood, even your hobbits are family. The story's name, which is like a shadow on the edges of an ancient world, shows how the shadow changes and deepens after a loss and a per story. Rest. Once more, I wish it hadn't happened within my lifetime. I answered Gandalf, and everyone who lives to witness such occasions, but it is not their place to decide. All we need to do is consider what to utilize the time allotted to us. And Frodo, Mirkwood is already starting to appear black. The adversary is quickly turning into, I believe, ancient plans are far from ripe, yet they are ripening will be difficult, and we should be erroneously difficult. The opponent would still be without a lifetime, if it weren't for this terrible chance. Something to provide him with the wisdom and strength to defeat all resistance overruns, all of the territories, and breach the final fortifications. Secondly, darkness already does not have the one. The three most beautiful elf lords hid from Rag. The 7 dwarf kings were never touched or tarnished by him or his hand. Though possessed, 3 of them have difficulty, while the others are dragons. Have eaten 9 of the things he offered to Mortchance, who were ensnared and haughty. They became a ring after falling to the dominion of the One ages ago. Wraith's shadows beneath his enormous shadow, his wote many years have passed since the 9 sonnets been overseas. But who knows, as the darkened ring defends additionally, they might walk once more. But come, even in the hands of the event, we won't discuss such topics. Shire, thus he has now dragons. The 9 to D. The 3 are hidden, or else mortally destroyed, along with haughty. The 7, still, but it doesn't bother him. All he needs is a go. One is that he manufactured a ring himself. The worst is that it belongs to him, and he allowed a servant's portion of his former authority into it, so he lengthens it all the others, wherever they may be, but will order them all again if he recovers it. Everything that has happened with them, including the 3, will be told naked. He will be more powerful than before, and this is the terrible opportunity. Odo thought the one had died and had been destroyed by the Thess as ought to be done, but he now undid himself. Therefore, it wasn't dead that it was discovered. Thus he's looking for it. He's looking for it, and all of his thoughts are focused on it. It is both our worst worry and his greatest hope. I wailed, why wasn't it destroyed? If Frodo was so powerful and it was so strong, how did the enemy take it? He held the ring in his palm, which was dear to him, as it was an opportunity for him if he noticed dark fingers already reaching out to grab elves, said Gandalf. The elves' ability to withstand him was not all men were alienated from them in the past, for the men of Western descent came to their assistance, which is in a period of ancient history that is worth rereading because there were gatherings of great but gloomy courage, and heroic actions that weren't, fairly pointless. One day maybe I'll tell you the entire story, or you'll hear it told in its entirety, by the expert, but for the time being, since the majority of it will be sufficient to tell you how long it took you, I'll just add that Gil-galad, Elven King, as well as Sauron, was overthrown by Elendil of the West, although they themselves died in the action remembering. Isildur Elendil chopped the ring from Sauron's grasp and claimed it as his own, after which Sauron was defeated and his spirit escaped and remained hidden until his shadow resurfaced in entirety. The ring vanished and tumbled into the Anduin River, and appeared as Isildur marched north along the east banks of you, was laid by the orcs of Galad, Iver, and King, the Gladden Field. fields. Mountains, nearly all of his people were killed. They jumped into the sea. But as he swam, the Isildur, Elendil, fingered the orcs, discovered him, and slaughtered him with arrows. And he was in the shadowy puddle in the middle of the Gladden fields. Claimed that the ring lost much of its history in Mirkwood as its wisdom and legend. Only a select few are aware of Riverdale, and the Council of the Wise could find nothing more. But I, Chow, continued the tale I imagine living by the banks of fields long after, but still very long ago. On the outskirts of Wilderland the Great, there is a quiet-footed, shrewd, small, I suppose, orc-bib-type being, similar to the faith of the Dads. Of shops because they frequently bathed in the river, fields that Iwai enjoyed, built or constructed small boats of breeds, and one family of legend position because it was bigger and more affluent than most, and Wise was guided by a grandmother of the folk stern, who was knowledgeable about old law, including the most curious and inquisitive Membigo. That family was named Smeagol and was drawn to beginnings and roots. He dug Besmelees, dove into deep waters, and grew. He stopped to gaze up at the green daddies of plants he had tunneled into, hilltops, tree leaves, or blossoms enjoyed. He had a companion named Air, and his head and eyes were down. Comparable type of Deagle, more keen-eyed, but slower than strong. At one point, they went down to the Gladens on a boat. Fields with huge iris and blooming begonias looked around the area. Deagle sat in the boat, Anam Smeagol Banks. His hook was abruptly rootsy, a large fish, and before he realized where he was pulled out and lowered to the bottom of the lake, at which point he released his line since he was holding his breath. He saw something gleaming in the riverbed, grasped down. Suddenly, he sprung up with a handful of muck and weeds in his hair. When he glanced at the boat, he discovered a stunning golden ring bed hidden in his palm, and it gleamed in an area. Eagles, the smell, had been observing him. Banshee, the sun, made him happy, while Deagle gloated over the ring, and from behind a tree, Shell quietly approached from behind and gave us that Deagle, my darling. Over his friend's shoulder, Gil said, "Why did you say Deagle? Because it's my birthday? I want riverbed love." Deagle remarked, "I have given a present," but Smell said, "I don't care. I discovered this affair, more than I could spend, and I discovered, hold on, are you really mine?" When Smell said love, he grabbed the Deagle by the throat. It choked him since the gold was so vivid and happy, but no one ever discovered what had happened until he threw the ring on his finger. Deagle's murder occurred far from his home, Darling. The body was cleverly concealed, but said came back, alone, and discovered that on my birthday, the suit, none of his relatives could see him. He concealed the ring since Smeagol was happy with his care. Airy. He put his knowledge to use by using it to uncover secrets, develop keen eyes and a mind, hunt for nefarious and corrupt purposes. The ring had a throat. His authority was in accordance with his given and size. It is not surprising that he lost a lot of support and was ignored. They kick finger in front of all of his relatives and he goes home. He started stealing from them, muttering to himself, gurgling in his throat. They referred to him as Gollum, cursed him, and urged him to him. Gone, and his grandma banished him from the family discovery site for peace. He left her whole and went alone, crying secrets. Little for the world's harshness, and he traveled up the river purposes. He reached a creek that flowed down from the mountains, and he proceeded that way. How he used his invisible fingers to catch and consume fish was ignored. RS on a particularly hot day, he was bending over a pool, the anthem, a brilliant light from the water, and a burning sensation on the back of the head. Hurt his teary eyes, and he pondered it because he had never, the final time, forgotten about the sun. Shook his fist at her as he looked down. He noticed the misty mountain summits, which the stream originates from, ahead. Arrived, and he assumed that it would be nice and shady all of a sudden. I could see the sun beneath those mountains. Those mountains must have roots. There must be some very important secrets, buried that had not been found since the start. So he traveled up by night. He discovered a little head in the mountains where the dark stream emerged. He hurriedly made his way into the hills like a maggot. The sun disappeared from sight. Knowledge, the ring accompanied him, and even the evidentiary deity into the shadows when his power had started growing once again. Arrived, he could not learn anything of it. Do you mean, F. Sudden, that this is the very Bilbo's encampment? The Gollum beast, how the wizard responded. I think it's a sad story. Secrets. Others may have experienced it, including some hobbits I've been aware of. Unbelievable that Gollum had any connection to the hobbits. Yet Frode merged, somewhat heatedly. One abomination. Idea, even though it is accurate sight, responded on their origins. I am more knowledgeable than the hobbits themselves, including Bilbo's tale. Implies that their kinship was deeply ingrained in their memories and thoughts. That was really similar, and they had a remarkable understanding of one another. How far more intelligent than a hobbit, such a story. RF, or consider the riddles that both an orc and an elf are familiar with. Yes, said. For one thing, Frodo asks riddles, but others other than hobbits are the same. Gollum intended to defraud everyone. An abomination. Don't cheat. He was merely attempting to catch poor Bilbo off guard at that time, and I dare bet that amused him. Evilness to begin a game that could make him an easy victim. However, it's also true that I wouldn't have thoughts. Gandalf responded, I'm afraid, but there was more if you haven't another. Yet I believe, and even Gollum wasn't completely destroyed. He had shown that he was more resilient than even a wise hobbit would have predicted. Perhaps there was a small area of his consciousness that remained unassimilated, and light entered there like, in actuality, the dim light. The past felt pleasant. Imagine hearing a loving voice once more, recalling the wind and trees him, sunlight and other forgotten things. But that would only highlight the nasty side, of course. Ultimately more irate and less lost. It would be unfortunate. There is little chance that the Gandalf side will be cured. For him, completely, is still hope. No, even though he had the ring for as long as he could remember. Rikel predicted that AD not worn it for a long time, and in the pitch-black darkness, it was barely. He is tough and slender, and he has never let his music fade. Yet, the pleasantness was obviously taking over his thoughts, and the agony had nearly all of the huge secrets hidden beneath forgotten terrains revealed to be intolerable. It was merely a course without anything to find, nothing worthwhile, just nefarious, covert beings, and bitterly recalling that he was completely unhappy. He detested everything, including the ring, and hoped it would be light and dark. Above all, what do you mean by W remembered that ID? The ring was undoubtedly Frodo's most valuable possession and all that mattered to him. But why didn't he discard it or leave if he didn't like it? After hearing everything that has been told, you should start to comprehend Frodo. Nearly as he hated it, Gandalf also adored it. He had no remaining will to get rid of the intolerable. A ring of strength takes care of itself. If Frodo may be deceitful, its guardian never gives up. At most, he toys with it, not completely referring it to another person's custody, and only an early moment when it darkly starts a grab. But as far as I, Bilbo, said, the only person in history to have ever transcended. He truly required all of my assistance while he was playing. Additionally, he would never have simply done it. It was not Gollum, whether you believe it or not. Frodo, but the ring, Frodo, made the final decision and departed. He arrived barely in time for the meeting. According to Bilbo, Ono wouldn't have fit in as an orc itself. Not to laugh, said Gandalf, it wasn't for you. In any event, the most bizarre thing that happened in the Tofring's whole history up until that point was Bilbo's arrival. After earlicing his hand blindly on it, he discovered that there were multiple powers at Frodo. The ring was attempting to transcend its master. It had betrayed him by slipping out of his playing grasp. But when an opportunity arose, it abandoned him. Deagle was killed, and Gollum followed not. Having eaten him, it was unable to use him again. He was too departed and cruel, and as long as it persisted in meeting its owner, he would never leave his deep orc again. He sent forth his sad thoughts from Mirkwood once more, but it was abandoned. Gollum is just a totally improbable individual. Pick him up. Incredibly, a rival from the Shire was behind that. Other than the Ringmaker's design, I can't explain it more simply than by claiming that Bilbo, not the thing's inventor, was intended to locate it, in which case you were to possess it, which could be a matter captured if it wasn't stated. How have you learned all of this from Frodo? I'm not sure I understand you again. Do you truly know everything there is to know about persisted Gollum? Just speculating. Gandalf continued to gaze at Frodo again. Eyes glinted. I had learned a lot. He commented on it a lot, but I won't abandon it. I will tell you about everything I've done for you, and everyone is aware of the history of Elendil and Isilda in the same way. The fire writing indicates that your ring is that one ring. Apart from further proof, and when did you find out? Frodo interrupted just now in this room to inquire where the wizard was. He strongly answered by motivating, but I anticipated it stated, I returned from a protracted search and a difficult journey to you at the final exam, the last evidence, and everything is now only Gollum. That in order to fit Gollum's role into the historical Gissem, I believed I might have begun blotting assumptions about Gollum, but I'm not speculating about that. I've seen him, I know you've seen him." Frodo exclaimed in wonder at Gollum. "Yes, it's the obvious thing to do, and I tried for a long time, if I could. Time ring. Finally succeeded. And then what transpired after, but did you realize that you were able to get an inquiry? Gollum was willing to tell you what I have told you, though he did so in the manner that I, Gollum, am a liar, and you need to sort that out. For example, when he summoned a ring, his birthday gift, only he adhered to it. He claimed that his grandmother, who possessed many lovely volumes of kind, was the source. Somewhat absurd tale, but I'm positive that some speculating. He was a wonderful person in his own right. The matriarch's number Gollum was ridiculous to give away elven rings, and it was a deagle murd cold. A hoax, but it had a grain of truth. He had prepared a defense for Bilbo, reciting it to his beloved repeatedly and rephrasing it. Ly, burning bones in the dark till he nearly fell for it. Eagle should have given the gift on his birthday. Ring to him. It had clearly appeared to be a present. It was a birth ring fit for him, and so forth. I put up with it for as long as I could, but the reality was terribly crucial, and I ultimately had to source it. I made him fear fire. Ripped the real tale from him, little by little. Thought he was missing something, so he bit together with a lot of numericing and snarling. Misinterpreted and ill-used. Yet when he finally revealed his history of Bilbo's escape and the truth of the Riddle Gang, he would only say in ominous implications that he seemed more afraid of mine than his, and he said that he would obtain his own place in the rear and watch to see if he was being kicked, pushed into a hole, and then nab it. Previously, Gollum had close buddies who were very powerful. They would assist him, and he would cover the cost. That was the main thing he detested. Was Wafire.LBO's name cursed? He was more aware of Little's origins, but how did he discover that? Frodo and the name Bilbo are both highly snarling. They assured Gollum that it would be easy to find his history after that. Gollum came out. Yes, he did, and his desire for the ring was evidence that it was more powerful than his fear of the light or the orcs. He left the mountains, you see, after a year or so, yet he was still bound by the ring. It was no longer consumed out of desire. He started to feel a little robbed, but he still felt quite old. He was extremely hungry and timid. He was extremely reddish from the moon's and sun's rays. Hated, and I believe he always cost. But he was using his ingenuity to test and discover that it was cursed, and hide from both daylight and moonlight. Gently in that, night with his icy white eyes and highly tiny terrified or unwarmed objects, he became more powerful and armed with fresh air. He ventured into, as one may anticipate, Mirkwood evident. You discovered, he said. I saw him. To Frodo. Orcs wandered before they responded to the scandal. It was challenging to learn everything while following Bilbo's trail. Out of desire, Ewer, as his speech was frequently interrupted by profanities, Old declaimed it wouldn't say no timid threats it had in its pockets. Not fair. A very suspicious little cheat question. It broke the rules by cheating first. Regulations. We should have squeezed it. Yes, dear, and we shall. I don't think moonlight is necessary to hear that sample of his discourse. Darl White had tired days of it already, but from clues left amid the I deduced that he had finally reached Esgaroth, and even the streets of Dintohanks to his cushioned feet. Peering well and discovering overtly in Wilderland, Frodo wondered widely, and many people were aware of Bilbo's identity and were aware of his origins. We had revealed our return. Gollum's keen ears would soon be on their way to his abode in the West. Discover what he desired, so why didn't he follow Pockets? Ked Frodo, why he hadn't mischieved Timid stated. Gondal. And now we first. I believe Gollum made an effort. He set forth and returned to the shore as far as the great river, but he turned away, unfurling the distance. I'm positive that nothing else drew him. Away the U.S., my pals believe those who pursued him for the Wood Elves found him first, which was simple for me. Feet or trail. It was still fresh. Covertly passed through Mirkwood and returned. Led them, but they were never able to apprehend him. Bilbo's mood was rife with rumors about the woodman. He claimed that even among the trees and birds, there were terrible tales. Some new terror overseas, Ost. ING Ghost Blood. Crawled into holes to locate the buffalo and climbed trees to find it. When it was timid, it found cradles by slipping through a dowse, but at the western boundary of the track in Mirkwood, it veered off to the south and lost after passing out of El's Ken's woods and in the distance. A fantastic error, yes, Frodo, but not him. Initially, I worry that I may let the situation worsen. Since I had a lot more to consider at the time, I left the trial period, and I continued to believe in the Mirkwood well returned. Years ago, Saruman. I paid for it since the trail was long and chilly when I took it, and there were many dark and dangerous days. After Bilbo left, everything was back to normal, and my search would have been in Aroga Ghost for the assistance of my friend Aragorn, the best traveler, and together they hunted for a Gollum in this era of the planet. All the way across Wilderland, without hope, without achievement, but finally, after I had given the chase and looked for other paths, Gollum was located, and my fantastic friend took the wretched creature with him. But he refuted the claim that all he did was cry and name us Nasty Roo with a leave. Gollum in he stroked his lengthy hands, whimpered, and winced when we pushed him, licking his fingers as though they hurt, as though he was recalling an ancient torture. But I fear that today there is no question that he made his slow, covert method gradually, mile by mile southward, till finally reaching the country of Frodo, could hear Mordor's, and as a thick hush descended upon the room, Sam's sheep planet, no longer be heard thumping, even outside, where everything appeared to be calm. "Hear me out," Mordor said, the dark power weathering, and Gandalf, unfortunately, Mordor, pulls all evil to fantasticize its best efforts to assemble them there. The enemy's ring would leave its mark, leaving him vulnerable to the summoning, and everyone was muffy about the new shadow in the south, and its animosity toward the west throat the lovely new pals that would support him in his revenge-seeking idiot in ancient times. He would discover far too much for his comfort, and eventually he would method-handed as he skulked, and pried on the limits. Taken for analysis, that's how it went. He had been there for a long time and was on his way to the restroom, which filled him with anxiety. Returning on a mischievous errand, although that calm is very important. His said a mischievous act to date was done, but unfortunately, the opponent has learned from things, dictating the person has been located once more and is aware of Ilder's location. He is aware of Gollum's ring's whereabouts and knows it's a fantastic ring. He is aware that it is not one of the three since it provides them life, and they have never been lost. He is aware that this is not one of the seven, and they do not suffer any harm, or the nine since these are all present, and he is aware that it is the finally. He has heard me mention limits. If he hasn't already discovered where it is, he might be looking for it right now. Yes, Frodo, that is a lie. I worry that he might be anxious. Eve, that Baggins' long unknown name, has become essential but important. Frodo wailed, much worse than the worst I've ever experienced. Oh, Gandalf, best of pals, in your clues and cautions, what am I supposed to do right now? I'm somewhat in a location. It's unfortunate that Bilbo refrained from stabbing that repulsive beast. He had a chance. Sympathy was the pity that remained with him. Kindness and hand pity without strife, without need. He has received a good reward. Frodo, make sure he took harm. Little was harmed by the evil and ultimately managed to get away since he was hearted to own the ring. Thus, I am feeling sorry that Frodo apologized, but I'm afraid I don't understand you. You haven't seen Gollum. Therefore, you don't feel sorry for him. Gandalf broke in. No. And I'd rather not say I don't understand you, Frodo. After all those terrible deeds, the elves have all experienced it. And now he is as nasty as an orc and merely an adversary. What am I to say? I may say that death merits it. Do those who die deserve to die? And do many people who live deserve to die? If you can give AM life, then don't be too eager to give it away in judgment, because even the most intelligent people are blind. In the end, I don't think there's much chance that Gollum will be little led before he dies. But it is possible, and he is connected to the destiny of my hearing. It tells me that he has a role to perform because of the ring. Yet, it doesn't get worse prior to the conclusion, and when it does, Bilbo's sympathy might break the outcome. In any case, we didn't kill many of yours. He is quite old and miserable. The Wood Elves keep him in prison, but they show him as much compassion as they can in their Frodo-insponded hearts. Adversary and demerits are incapable of killing. Gollum, I wish he had never discovered the ring and had not kept it. That I didn't have. Die? Why did you allow me to keep it? Why didn't you force me to throw it away? It enables you to create the wizard asked. Have blind. Listen to what I've stated, that you are not considering what you said. B's for discarding it. That was clearly incorrect. These rings off a way of being discovered in malicious hands. It might have caused iring, harm, and worst of all, it may have fallen into the enemy's hands. Yes, it definitely would, since he is the one, and he's making every effort to locate yours. Of course. Draw it for himself, my love. You were in danger, Fino, and that has bothered me profoundly. But even when I was there, I had to take some chances because there was so much at stake. Moreover, the Shire has always been protected by vigilant watchmen. I would not believe that the ring would have any long-term effects on your eyes as long as you never used it. away. Not bad. At least create a very long time. Moment. And you have to recall, I last saw you 9 years ago. I didn't know much for sure yet, but why not Ruth like you did? Should have been done long ago. Oh, Frodo exclaimed. Once more, I would have gotten rid of you if you had warned me, or even just messaged me. How would you go about doing that? Definitely you ever attempted it, but I guess one could pound it or melt it. Now that Gandalf had tried, Frodo loved the ring from his pocket once again and examined it. It now seemed simple and without mark or any gadget that he could see. The gold appeared extremely stark and pure, and Frodo admired how flawlessly round it was and how it matched. Lovely its color was. When he removed it, it was a noble and valuable item that he had meant to throw into the fire's hottest spot, but he determined that he was unable to. He struggled to do so, and he weighed it in his hand. Hesitating, he made himself recall what Gandalf did, inshould him, and then, with willpower, exclaimed, motioned to toss it away, but discovered that he had placed it in his pocket. Gandalf laughed when he saw it. As you can see, bitterly. Frodo found it very difficult. I couldn't make it, and I wouldn't want to harm it. Fossilized, which would cause you to lose your mind. But even if you use it and strike it, force won't shatter the ring. Using a sledgehammer wouldn't cause any damage to it. It is impossible to undo with you an end, or naturally. Even a small fire, like mine, wouldn't go out. This gold ring has always. Went through it without any problems and even unheated, but Shire lacks a smith's forge that could alter it. It has been reported that dragon fire is capable of doing things that even the dwarves' furnaces and hands could melt and eat the power rings, but there isn't a dragon anymore. Remaining on Ahai, where the ancient fire is sufficiently hot, and there was never a dragon who could have hurt the one pocket. Even the Black Ellagan Sauron created that controlling ring. There is only one method for him to loiter. The crevices of doom in the throw, the ring mind. Fire Mountain's depths of Orodruin. If you truly want to demolish it and make it impossible for the enemy for all time, and I sincerely hope to destroy it, Frodo, or well, to be it sobbed, I wish I had never seen the Destructor. I am not suited for dangerous tasks. Why did that occur to me, and why even I? Such questions cannot be addressed. You can be certain that the gauntlet was not for any merit that others do not have, possess, not for wisdom or power anyway, but you've been selected. You must thus utilize all of your power, heart, and cunning, not anymore. All of those things, given your wisdom and strength. Will you not take the ring? No, Enidaf exclaimed, leaping to his feet with that power. I ought to analogize much power and awful, and the thing would acquire ever greater power over me. His face was illuminated by the fire, and his eyes gleamed lethally. Don't tempt Orodruin, because I don't want to become like the ring's path in their hearts, despite the evil Lord himself, who is by empathy, weakness, and the will to absorb strength. Good. Don't tempt me with destruction. Dare to take it or even keep it. It is easy to use, but if you wanted to use it, it would be too fantastic. I will need it so much. He stepped to the window and pushed Drew back shoving. Great dangers lie ahead of me. Sunlight flowed back through the shutters and drapes. Sam walked down the path outside and inside the room. Whistling, the thing turned back to face Frodo and stated that the choice tests would he put his hand on Frodo's, but I will always help you. Shoulder, I'll assist you in drying this weight as long as it belongs to you. Bear, but we have to act quickly because the adversary is after a lengthy pleathel. Stillness. Gandalf took a seat once more and appeared to be emitted in concentration as he smoked his pipe. His eyes closed, but unbe, he was closely observing the lids, and Frodo's strength crimsoned the heart's embers till they filled his eyesight, and appeared as though he was peering down into deep wells. He was contemplating the legendary craving. Doom and the fear of the finale, Gandalf said, Fire Mountain. Are you consuming? Have you made up your mind? Don't respond. Fr drapes to himself from darkness, only to discover to ruined astonishment that it was not, and that he could see the shining garden, or maybe used on what I understand stated, I guess I have to hold you. Shoulder and protect it at least for the sake of providing me with whatever it does to you. Doing this will lead to evil gradually if you continue. Isp Gandalf said purpose. Frodo, I hope you find someone else soon, and you may keep her. But for now, it appears that I pose a threat to everyone in my neighborhood who should leave Bag, and since I can't keep the ring, and remain Crimson Higher Hearth Evemberson behind, and disasters. I should save the Shire if I could. I sighed. Could have believed that there were moments when I felt the locals were too dim and uninteresting for Thurks, and believed in a dragon mountain. An earthquake could be beneficial for them, but mind, longer response. As long as the sure reforms are behind a secure and cozy place, I will discover more wandering. Bearable, I'll know that shining a solid foothold someplace, even if my understanding, and there again, of course, I've occasionally considered things disappearing, but I envisioned that as sort of came on, a science of adventure similar to Bilbo continues. Conclusion in peace purpose. So it would require exile, a flight from peril to peril, drawing it after me. So I guess I have to leave. I feel very little, and in the vicinity. I have to accomplish that and rescue the Shire. Isolated here, desperate, the adversary is extremely desperate, and sadly, he kept it from Gandalf, but sighed. Poke had a strong desire to follow Bilbo's heart, blazed with desire to follow Bilbo and possibly locate him once more. It was so powerful that it triumphed over him nearly right there, and down the road, without his hat, because of Shire fright. My beloved Frodo exclaimed, just as Bilbo had done while wandering, mourning in the past. As I've mentioned, Gandalf hobbits are truly remarkable beings. In a month, you can learn everything there is to consider about their methods, but a century later, they can still catch you off guard. I barely anticipated receiving such a response, not even from you. But Bilbo was flawless in that he didn't realize how crucial it was to choose his heir. Demonstrate that I'm on leave. You're correct. The ring won't be able to stay concealed in the Shire for a long period of time, both for your own benefit and because you will have to leave the Andin name behind for others. It won't be safe for you to carry that name outside the Shire, or in the I'll give you a trail name. wild, so when you go, you'll be Mr. Underhill. But if you know someone, you may overthrow them instead of going alone. Trust, as well as those you would be willing to accompany you into unknown dangers if you passed. Friend, use caution when making decisions and when speaking. If the enemy has several spies, even among your closest allies, and numerous ways of listening, he abruptly halted. As Frodo listened, he realized how silent everything was. Gandalf slipped to one side of the interior and the interior of the window, and suddenly he leaped to the sill. Air, out a long arm, and a squawk descended, and Sam G.J.'s curly head was stayed by one of them. "Bless my beard, please," I said. "Is it now, Gandalf Samgamgeandat, that you could be doing well? May the Lord bless you," Gandalf remarked. "In any case, Sam, I was only mowing the grass border between the windows." He grabbed his shears and displayed them as he followed me. Evidence. Gandalf bitterly said, "It's been a while since I last saw you. How long has it been?" "Been using your shears. I heard their sound. I'm not following you, sir, and I'm eavesdropping on your eyes. I apologize, but it's a trifling matter that there are no eaves at Bag End. Don't be speaking." Did you heed what Gandalf's eyes flashed, and did Mr. Frodo's and Downs protrude like bristles? Sam trembled as Sir said, "Don't let him hurt me, sir. Allow him to transform into anything my old father would adopt. I didn't mean to hurt man or sir, and he won't." You mentioned that Frodo could not contain his laughter. Even though he was surprised and a little perplexed, he is them, as I am. Just get said. Give him a direct response to his queries, e.g., if you don't mean any damage. Well, sir responded, remarking a little, "Did I know that there was a contract involving a window? Rings, Mr. Bilbo, sir, and elves, a flaming mountain, and dragons? I listened, sir, because you know what I could tell myself. I adore stories about that, but please bless sound, sword, and I think they do too, regardless of Ted's. I would love to see elves, sir. When you go, Gandalf appears out of nowhere because they couldn't take me to the elves." He shouted, smiled, and hissed out both brown arms as he came bristles. He hears grass clippings, and Sam, who was shocked, lifts his sir all through the window and stood. "Take me to see some elves," he requested, lying on the muoner, observing Sam won't, but with a slight smirk on his face. "You've got laughter. Mr. Frodo is leaving away." "I did, sir, which is why you heard me choke. I think I am. Not to, sir, but suddenly I couldn't help but be upset." Sam lamented that Frodo had realized that flying and departing the Shire would require more agonizing goodbyes than simply bidding the comfortable surroundings of Bag End, which I will have to go. But he took a close look at Sam. "You will keep that dead if you truly can yourself. See if you don't breathe a word of what you've heard. Secretly, Gandalf will transform you into Ted's toad and fill the garden." I hopped on his knees amid grass snakes. Shaking, "Get up," Sam remarked. "Gondal, I've got you. Better still, something to keep your mouth shut and inside. Discipline you for listening. You'll leave with Mr. Frodo, sir," exclaimed Sam. Leaping store, I went to see the elves, and all the celebrations when aground urged me to go for a walk. He yelled, then erupted into tears, And there concludes our brief goodbye tonight. I hope you enjoyed this brief joke. In addition to the readings, suddenly, incredibly intimate, is Stupset, Legend of the Hobbits and their beloved, good-natured friends, and I hope you have adventures even as you finish these story biddings greater than Frodo's in your bag ends this evening.